Hello, everyone, and welcome to tonight's school committee meeting. Matt, would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We have a consent agenda, minutes of November 10th, 2016, and oath to bills and payroll.
Make a motion to accept the consent agenda as read.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Any comments or questions on that? Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None. All right, we have two sections of the meeting for interested citizens. This is the first. If there's any interested citizens who would like to speak before the school committee. Seeing none, we'll dive into recognition.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So, my notes are kind of broken up pre-Thanksgiving break, post-Thanksgiving break, and then a little bit after Christmas break. So before Thanksgiving break, we had the junior versus senior powder puff game. I'm just going to note, I know there's a lot of like angst and tension around it every year, but the juniors were not so happy with some of the seniors' playing methods, including having your flags tucked in a little bit more than they should be. The high school had a great production of a Midsummer Jersey. We had a cast of around 35, I think, and everyone had a great time doing it. Well, that's it for before Thanksgiving. After Thanksgiving, this morning we had a wonderful breakfast at the high school to recognize students with all A's. My mom moved the letter before I got to read it, so I know that it was today, and so I showed up just a little bit late. December 13th at the high school is the high school's winter band and chorus concert at 7 p.m. The middle school had an awesome performance of Raining Cats and Dogs, which was written by Mr. Bergman. I think in total it was a cast of 46. And the middle schoolers had a great time doing it, but we also had a lot of high school help. So I did costumes, a few high schoolers did tech, one assistant directed, one stage managed. So the middle school and high school drama departments are very interlinked, which I think is nice. The middle school winter band and chorus concert is the 15th at 7 p.m. It's also at the high school. December 23rd, the 7th graders are going to North Shore Musical. Yeah, they're seeing Christmas Carol. Russell Street, they currently have the book fair going on Wednesday and Thursday of this week, and next week are half days for parent-teacher conferences. And then after Christmas break, and I know we're reaching out a little bit, we have the Geography Bee and Kids Night Out on January 6th.
All right, thank you. It's the time of year.
It is. Thank you. I'd just like to echo what Olivia said. We had two fantastic fall drama performances, and you know, it's so nice and to have so many talented students in our community when they put on these plays. And you look at the number of students that take part in these plays, it's really phenomenal. They're so well done. So, you know, special thanks to staff and students for continuing to build this program. I mean, it's built up through the years. We now have a fall play and a spring play, and a lot of time and energy go into these productions, and certainly a pleasure to offer those productions to the community. So thank you for that. We've had an intergenerational program with the Council on Aging for a number of years, and I just wanted to spend a minute thanking our students, in this case our grade 3 students. They quite often decorate and interact with our seniors before they have a luncheon, and it's really nice to have our students reach out to the seniors in our community, and they greatly appreciate it as well. So thanks to the teachers and students for taking part in those important activities with our seniors. And that's it for my recognition.
Moving to old business. Before we jump into that, Olivia's under new business. We have our MCAS presentation tonight, which is lengthy. Would you like to move the gold award proposal to this section of the agenda?
Sure.
All right, just in case you want to bail on us.
We'll see. I was planning on being here for a while because I thought I was going to be at the end. So.
Well, I appreciate that, and I'm going to just give you the flexibility to decide what's in your best interest.
All this free time now.
Do I need to turn on the mic or anything, or am I good?
No, you're good.
Okay. So most of you already know me. I'm Olivia Rosenblum. I have been in Girl Scout Troop 60340 for 11 or 12 years now. But I am now an Ambassador Girl Scout, which makes me qualified to go for my Gold Award. For those of you that don't know, the Gold Award is equivalent to the Eagle Scout Award. It just has some slightly different requirements, more focused on sustainability and not larger impact, but like mainly the sustainability. What I wanted to do for my project with the school committee's approval is to build a little free lending library on Shaker Lane's playground. For me, literacy is very important because when I started at Shaker Lane, I had a really hard time getting that reading skill down, but now with the help of the reading specialist and all the help I got at Shaker Lane, I'm an avid reader. I'm sad that at the high school I don't have as much time to read. But I went to a conference last year and it said 49% of adults consider themselves non-literate. This doesn't mean that they can't read at all, because if you look at the stats, more adults are actually literate now than ever before. But it means they don't sit down and just read a book. They'll read the text, they'll read the tweets. If they see an article on Facebook, they'll click on it and skim it. But they're not sitting down and just reading a book for the pleasure of reading. And I think that's really sad. But what they said at the conference was the disconnect for these 49% of adults is that when they were younger, they didn't have as much choice on what books they were allowed to read. It was very prescribed reading once they got for Littleton, halfway through Russell Street and on, which isn't a bad thing because I've loved some of the books the school district has exposed me to. But there's also I just want to read a YA book every once in a while. I know it's not going to be a great book like Scarlet Letter or Hamlet, but it's just fun and it's easy to read. So before I came here to present this to you, I had a meeting with Mr. Faraday and Miss Zulinski. Did I pronounce it right? Yeah. Who's the reading specialist over at Shaker Lane. And they both thought this was a great idea, but they did have some concerns, which I'm going to address them with you now because I'm sure they'll be part of the questions. One was maintenance. How can you put a little wooden box out on the playground and hope it will be okay? There's a lot of designs now, especially from the website, which is littlefreelendinglibrary.com or .org, and they have designs that are already made that you can purchase, or designs sketched out that you can build, and all of them really take into account weatherproofing and safety. So none of the designs use actual glass, because if the door closes too fast and the glass shatters, or if it accidentally gets hit with a rock, it's a safety thing. So they're all made of plexiglass, which is, don't know if you've ever worked with it, just a tad bit harder to break. And the roof is also weatherproofed. It has a certain material on the top that helps rain slide off of it to protect the books inside. Vandalism was also one of the bigger concerns, and I understand that. According to Little Free Libraries, they've had, over the past few years, a 0.01% vandalism rate amongst the reported cases. But they did give some suggestions if you wanted to help prevent any vandalism. And that include keeping it in a well-trafficked area, but not in any situation where it would be bumped by a car. So the playground is a perfect setting for it. And also keeping the art that you can put on the sides aligned with the area that it's in. So with your approval for Shaker Lane, I would do Shaky on one side and the heart logo on the other. The other big concern that Mr. Faraday had and Ms. Zulinski had was the age appropriateness of the books, because the whole concept behind the library is there's just books in there. You can pull one out and read it. If you really love it, you can take it home and bring back another one. But the changing of the books in the library doesn't necessarily ensure that all of the books are age accurate. And so with that, Ms. Zulinski and I are going to come up with a program that allows us to monitor the books with an ideal plan of high school students checking in on it once a month. And also, because the whole project is focused around sustainability, I need to raise funds just for the project anyway, and some of those funds would go towards buying books for the library to cycle through. Are there any questions? Comments, concerns?
I think it's awesome that you're picking this issue, because reading is the foundation not just of learning and education, but also a love of learning and the excitement that kids get when they first learn how to read and it finally clicks. And I think that a lot of the projects we see from high school students are focused on what they know, and I'm very excited that reading literacy at Shaker Lane is something that you're talking about, because I think that's often forgotten once kids get into high school. So that says that you're thinking about the whole system, which is what we try to do. So I'm very excited about it. Do you have a timeline?
Not exactly yet. So how the Gold Award structure is so I sent in my application over the summer and I got approved. So I have a local advisor in the town who is Miss Newman, who is a certified K through 5th teacher, and she actually subs at Shaker Lane from time to time. And then I also, through Girl Scouts, get assigned a Gold Award Advisory Committee leader, I think is like the whole abbreviation. And before I can even start work, like start fundraising, designing, I need to get written approval. And I thought it was just Mr. Faraday, and he was like, I'm not entirely sure, so let's go to school committee. But my goal would be to have it done, like have it up at some point over the spring or summer this year, and so then I get to spend my senior year really establishing and checking in on the monitoring system.
Excellent. Thank you.
Anybody else?
Yeah, no, this is a great proposal. I'm glad to see, we often see the Boy Scouts coming in to do presentations on their programs. Glad to see the Girl Scouts also doing the same thing. The one part, if I remember from watching the Girl Scouts, is sustainability. And so what's the, so the first year you'll still be here, so that that checking in will work. Have you got any thoughts about how the next generation might take over, keeping a little bit of monitoring of what's there?
That's a great question. I have given some thought to it, and I haven't worked out all of the kinks yet because I was still waiting on this step. But the two different ideas that I kind of have are one and the same, and it's that different service groups, either like a younger Girl Scout troop, because there's a lot of Daisy troops that are just starting up. So by the time I leave, they'll be brownies and juniors, so they'll be old enough to handle the responsibility of checking in. Then the other one would be the National Honor Society. So I'm currently the junior head of their book drive committee, which I'm the only member of the book drive committee currently. So with the National Honor Society, like advisor heads, I'm gonna hope to like warp it a little bit so it will be more related with the Little Free Libraries and Littleton. Because I know another Girl Scout troop is working on doing a similar project for their Silver Award.
Excellent, thank you.
So, Olivia, how big would this, capacity-wise, are you looking to make it for books?
It doesn't, a lot of the ones that I've seen and the one that I was looking at online, it's maybe a 1.5 feet wide and like a foot or so deep.
Okay. And so age appropriateness is, like you said, so would this specifically just be geared towards K through 2 students, or is it going to be a little bit older, some of the books, or?
As of right now, I'm planning on having it be geared more for K through 2 students, but depending on how kind of the first few months and year go, I'm happy to like adjust. And that's one of the other things I didn't say is none of this is on like the school at all. If for some reason it doesn't work out or it's just not the right fit for the school, it's my responsibility to take it down, and maintenance is all falls back onto a program I establish.
Okay. But if it were successful, was there any chance that you might put one at Russell Street for, say, 3 through 5, or is?
If it's super successful and depending how it goes, if I'm still around, then I would be happy to put another one at Russell Street for 3 through 5. If I'm not around, there's a lot of Girl Scout troops that haven't quite fallen as apart as like my grade's Girl Scout troops have, that are always in need of projects.
Might be a good project going forward for some of them.
All right, thank you, Libby. I thought you did a great job of setting the context of why doing something at this age can, propagate good habits as the kids get older, and I really appreciate that. As someone who's an avid reader as a kid and kept going, you made a big difference. So nice job of setting that up. Why don't we take a motion on this, just we typically do that for the Boy Scouts, correct?
Yes.
I make a motion to accept Olivia's proposal to put a free lending library at Shaker Lane School.
Okay, motion made and seconded. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Very good. Thank you, Olivia.
Thank you.
Mark, you want to talk to Olivia and figure out how to get this done?
I was just going to say the library supports her, the Friends of the Library support her. We have a free library at my house, and we'll help her get it going.
Good, awesome. Excellent. People can, instead of crisscrossing town picking up Pokemons on their phone, they can crisscross town picking up books.
Yeah.
Thank you, Olivia. All right. So the next item is a motion on a reproposed library building slope site. Daryl, you can kind of name that on this for us.
Just your signature, 'cause then I can
So
put that in.
either last meeting or the meeting before, the library folks were in to ask us to get the motion voted so that they can continue the process of the grant application. They sent the draft motion, we forwarded up to the school's legal counsel for review, and I think basically we finally came to the motion that's on the screen here. It's pretty lengthy. There's a few whereas clauses that were as part of the stock language, and then the meat of the proposal motion is that, pursuant to the appropriate Mass General law on releasing the property, we cited the draft drawing that they gave, recognizing that that's not a fully dimensioned certified plan, that as long as the final plan is substantively similar to that plan there, that we're okay with releasing it to the library trustees. And then there's a clause in here that if they don't get the grant or town meeting doesn't approve proceeding with the grant, the property will revert back to our control. And that's triggered at the June timeframe there. So I think it's all set for the pieces there, and the school council is comfortable with the language
Yes,
that was
they
in
are.
there. So I think we're set to proceed with that.
Any questions or comments before we entertain a motion? Mark, I'll ask you if you have any comments too, but let's just go through the committee first.
No, I'm good.
Good, all right. I appreciate, Daryl, the work that we did here, and I appreciate the school administration running it through legal counsel. I think what's important here is that this kind of opened up an issue that none of us were cognizant of, and it's more than just the slope site, it's that whole property, and that will get resolved. What this does is it kind of resolves, conditionally, a small portion of the site that allows a project to continually move forward, but also protecting the interests of the school department, and also letting us revisit the entire site and the issues associated with it, regardless of what actually happens with the library, so I think it covers all our bases pretty well. And I think the important thing to remember is that it's really just a conditional transfer. There's still a lot of work that's got to get done by you guys and by the town and the community before we figure out exactly what's going to take shape back there. But at least it's a step in the right direction, and it moves the process forward one step.
Yeah, it's the steps that we need for the grant, and I assume there's going to be other steps if the whole parcel is going to be repartitioned between town versus school. We'll have to go through this whole thing again, but this is what allows us to move forward for Jim.
Yeah, and actually, I covered it during PMBC, but I'll cover it now instead, is the thought that we're going to need a survey even for some of the alumni field work is coming up. And it's like I said to Chuck, who attended the meeting last night, is we're going to have to deal with the fact that that 35-acre parcel has to get surveyed, and which project or split across projects or just as a town initiative needs to happen there. So, because it doesn't make sense for everybody to be doing partial surveys.
When we all know we need a full survey.
And then the cost of all those partial surveys will probably exceed the price of the survey that we need to get just all the work done there. So with that, I'm not going to, it's a fairly lengthy motion, so I'm going to just defer to as written in the packet there. So I make a motion to execute the land transfer motion as written in the packet.
Second.
All right, motion is made and seconded. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None. All right.
Thank you.
All right.
My favorite motion.
It was a lot.
All right, moving on to presentations.
There's even like whereases in it.
One of the cockles of my heart. All right, so we're on presentations. We're going to have
This evening, we're going to have the middle school talk about the artifact dig presentation that they've been doing for a number of years. Mrs. Temple has brought us a video, absent teacher and students, obviously students because of the time of the evening, and we thought it was a good way to bring another school to the forefront. We've been focusing a lot on the high school this year in terms of presentations, so I've requested to the principals that we find a way to start talking about some of the projects that we're doing in our other schools. So all schools will be doing some presenting prior to the end of the year. So Cheryl, did you want to say anything?
I just wanted to add, when I asked Todd if he would give this presentation, why he hadn't done it in the past, he said, because I live really far away and it would be a really late night for me. So this is kind of interesting that he put this presentation together and he narrates through the slides for us. So I think you'll find it interesting.
Hello. Thank you for the opportunity to present the Archaeological Dig and STARS grant program tonight. Unfortunately, I can't be there with you, but I'd like to share this video with you as a way to highlight the program. This year in October, we completed the 9th annual Archaeological Dig in our ancient history classes, which are grade 7 at Littleton Middle School. The Archaeological Dig is a culminating event at the end of a unit on archaeology and historical sources in our 7th grade ancient history classes. It is also part of the Massachusetts Frameworks for History and Social Sciences. The Archaeological Dig is a joint project that's done by myself, Todd Jabai, of Littleton Middle School, and Kimberly Connors of Archaeology Outreach Education. Kimberly is a local archaeologist who runs a program working with students all throughout the New England area. She has experience excavating in New England, as well as in Jordan and in Cyprus. The program is funded by the parents of Littleton Middle School, also by the Littleton Middle School PTA and the Littleton Public Schools, and we'd like to thank them for their generous donations. During the Archaeological Dig, students rotate through several roles. All students will get to do all the roles, and they rotate through these roles in the course of the day. 2 students serve as excavators. They do the actual digging for artifacts. When an artifact is found, they also take all the measurements and help with the graphing of the artifacts on the artifact sheet. So there also is math and science involved in the archaeological dig as well. There are screeners. As all of the dirt is removed, the screeners take the dirt to the screening area and run it through the screen to see if they've missed any artifacts or anything that might have been really small that they might have not seen in the dirt, so there's a chance to catch those artifacts so that they can be bagged and tagged as well. Finally, the final role is scribes. Scribes are perhaps the most important job on the dig. They complete all the paperwork. They record all of the artifacts, where they were found, in what quad, what level, and they also graph the location of where the artifact was found in their particular dig site. All of that information on the scribe sheet will be important because students will use that back in the classroom to analyze the actual artifacts. For the archaeological dig, we don't use artifacts from ancient Egypt or ancient Mesopotamia. We actually use real artifacts that you might find if you were digging in Massachusetts. So these artifacts range from Native American artifacts to colonial artifacts, artifacts from the Industrial Revolution, in particular the Industrial Revolution in Lowell, and then also artifacts from the modern era. And these artifacts have been collected by Kimberly throughout her digs, and then we make ties to them as to what similar artifacts would have been used in the ancient world. After the conclusion of the dig, Kimberly returns to the classroom and she does a laboratory with students. And in this laboratory, students actually use the artifacts that they found during their dig. So each student in the group will pick one artifact that they like best or that they're curious about. They'll use their paperwork that the scribes completed on the dig site. And as part of the analysis, they need to figure out how the artifacts were made, who made them, what they were made out of, the material, and most importantly, what they reveal about the people who left them behind. And that's the most important question that historians and archaeologists do want to dig, is we want to know, what does that artifact tell us about the people of the past? And lastly, to make connections between the artifacts that they found and the artifacts for ancient history, how would that artifact have been used for a similar purpose in the ancient world? So for example, one of the artifacts you can see on the screen is a railroad spike, which would have been put down to hold the railroad ties on the railroad line. Some students often made a connection to either wheels on a chariot, or perhaps the nails used to hold carts together in ancient Mesopotamia. So any type of those connections, students can really go however they want with this, wherever they want with this, as long as they can back up what they have to say with good reasoning. So that concludes the archaeological dig. Students really enjoy this activity, and it's one of the things that they really remember for 7th grade because it brings their learning alive to them. So not only are they learning about archaeology and ancient history in the classroom, they're actually doing it the way that archaeologists and historians do. The next thing I'd like to talk about this evening is the STARS grant that we received at Littleton Middle School. STARS stands for Students and Teachers Working with Artists, Scientists, and Scholars. And this program is a grant from the Mass Cultural Council, and myself and Kimberly Connors applied for this grant back in October, and we received this grant once again. This is about the 6th time that we received this grant. It's a $5,000 grant that enables her to come in and work again with the students in a program for ancient art and archaeology. She will be coming in sometime between May and June for a total of 10 class sessions to work with students individually. The first part of the grant program is on ancient ceramics. And this part is broken down into several subparts. The first activity that we do actually involves real ancient potsherds. Potsherds are pottery pieces. Once the pot is broken up, the sherds are the individual broken pieces. And historians and archaeologists never find an intact pot, or it's very, very rare. So they would most likely find these potsherds. Kimberly has a collection of these potsherds. They vary in how old they are. Most of them are between 2,000 and 3,000 years old. The oldest piece she has is actually a potsherd from the time of the pharaoh Tutankhamun, otherwise known as Tut. And kids really like the fact that they're holding something that's thousands and thousands of years old. So students learn about the types of pots in the ancient world and how these different types of pots were used. So the first activity is that they get an assortment of potsherds, and they have to use their knowledge to figure out what kind of pot the potsherd came from, how ancient people would have used that pot, and what that pot reveals about trade patterns in the ancient world. So if we're doing Greece, who did the Greeks trade with? Besides, of course, themselves, they may have traded with Rome, they traded with as far as India and the Middle East. So it tells us that the ancient world was really a global civilization as well. The second part of the ceramics activity is that students are actually going to create their own plate. And you can see examples of 2 plates that were created in last year's grant program. Students choose a particular ancient culture, whether it be Mesopotamia, Egypt, India, Greece, Rome, or Israel. Those are the civilizations we study in 7th grade. And they create a plate that represents that ancient culture. And they have to actually use symbols and items and artifacts that we have studied and incorporate that into their design. They also have to incorporate some artistic elements of that culture. So for example, you can see the borders that would have been common to ancient Greece, the Greek key, or borders that were common to ancient Egypt. What students don't know is once they've finished with their pots, they actually are going to break them. And the students kind of get astonished at this, but they really like it because, of course, 7th grade graders like to break things. So they actually switch with a different group, they break their pots, and then they actually need to reassemble them. And this is called by archaeologists reconstruction. So they're actually doing the work that archaeologists would do in the field by reconstructing these pots to see what it is we can learn from them. So the students would reconstruct their pot, and then, or I should say the pot of another group, and then since they hadn't seen that pot before, they need to look at the symbols on it, look at the artistic elements, and determine what does that pot or that plate tell us about the culture. So not only did they say it's Egypt, from the symbolism on the plate, what does it tell us about Egypt? The next part of the grant program is on ancient architecture. Students study the various architectural elements of Greek and Roman temples. We see these very commonly in the world today used as classical architecture. So for example, in Washington, D.C., in churches and homes, we see columns, we see pediments, we see different architectural elements that have simply been copied from the ancient world. So first they study those architectural elements so that they'll be able to identify them. Next, Kimberly teaches them how archaeologists actually draw buildings. She talks about top plans and front elevation plans, and you can see an example of a student drawing on the slide. Finally, students choose a particular religion that we studied this year. In 7th grade, students study the ancient Egyptian religion, the ancient Greek religion, the ancient Roman religion. They also study Hinduism and Buddhism and Judaism. So students can choose whichever of those they want, and they actually create their own temple design using elements and symbols that we've learned about those religions. And you can see one example on the screen of a temple design from last year. They have to create the front or elevation design, and they also have to create the bird's eye view or aerial design if you were looking at the temple down from a plane. So how an archaeologist would draw it. Not necessarily how you would see it from a plane because you'd only see the roof, but basically if you took the roof off, what you would see underneath. And we have 2 more temples that students draw last year. One here is Hindu, and the one on the right is Buddhist. Students really enjoy this program. It brings really archaeology and history to life for them because they're actually doing the work of historians and archaeologists. And it also gives them, lets them express their creative side. We're looking forward to doing this. This is actually the 6th year we're doing it. Last year was the 5th year. And we will be sharing all of this work. students will be selecting, based upon a series of criteria, the best work from each class. Those best work from each class will go on an online museum that will be linked to the middle school website. And then students will actually use another set of criteria to determine who is the school winners, and the school winners will actually receive gift certificates to various restaurants and groups in the community that donate them. So it's not only a good learning activity, but the students have some motivation as well to earn a little prize at the end. So we will let you know by Twitter and by email and on the school website when the museum is up, so please look for that and see some of the great work of my students. Thank you so much for the time to share this activity, and again, to all the groups in the community who donated to make it happen.
That's it.
That's great.
What do you guys think of that methodology? Presenting like that, like online like that?
I think it's great if it saves one of the teachers from having to be bored to death watching us do this for
Yeah.
a couple hours of their life after school.
I wouldn't want to do it all the time, but it definitely worked here.
Yeah, no, as a means of getting other things exposed to us that we wouldn't normally see, I think that it's great.
Yeah.
And it's captured that it could show up on the website.
Right, you put a link to it and.
Right.
Yeah.
That's what I think. I liked it a lot.
Great.
You know, I think that if, you know, we had some video of the kids actually doing the activity, you know, I'm not criticizing, but, you know, I know he did it, what he could do in this particular instance, but I think that would be great. But it's consumable multiple times rather than, sometimes when we have the kids come here, we like it, but it's kind of a captive audience. And I appreciate Mr. Jabai. I thought he did a nice job of fairly succinctly showing what the program is about, and people who have kids in the program that have gone through it, we know what it's about, but maybe not as much detail. You know, I thought it was shards. I didn't know it was shirts. You know, so I learned something new. Can we thank Kimberly? So she, as a community member coming in year after year and supporting this program, just letting her know the school committee is very appreciative of that. That was great. But yeah, I think this is a good idea if you guys wanted to do it periodically throughout the year at different levels. And you have teachers that, you know, I think we do. I think there are teachers that are chomping at the bit to do stuff like that. That would be great.
It's really nice to be able to see our teachers using recent presentation software as well. You know, this isn't just done for the presentation, it's done for flipped classroom.
Right, exactly. I think that's the
methodology.
other thing. It gives us a flavor of how the classroom is evolving.
So, you know, it's all about balance. I think, you know, we still like people here at times too, but it's really nice to also see what our teachers are doing in our classrooms and how technology is impacting their classrooms. And not only that, but we have a couple of teachers that go beyond the call of duty, so to speak, to make sure that they write this grant every year so that our students can continue to be exposed to this program. So please extend my thanks as well to Mr. Jabai, and thank you, Cheryl.
Does anyone mind if I add something real fast? So as a student, I can vouch for this. It was a lot of fun to do. When my grade did it, it wasn't quite as flushed out as it is now. And when my grade did it, we were the first class that got to like design the like plate from like ancient Greek and then break it and then like rebuild it. But it's kind of interesting how much more, like from when I was in 7th grade to now, how much more it's like spread out. Like I would gladly go back to 7th grade and like do that again. That was a lot of fun. And what he said about using the like artifacts that you would assume you would find like in our general area, same strategy from back when I did it, and my grade really enjoyed it. So I know he said in his video that funding comes from like PTA and the grants, but that's something that is worth doing again.
That's great. That brought me flashbacks from when I had his class in 7th grade as well. And I remembered, I was going to say, I think I remember making a plate. I think it was like a paper plate or something, but I didn't remember breaking one. So I was bummed that I missed that, but definitely a great experience.
That was pre-grant when we couldn't afford to break them.
Yeah, it was when we tried breaking one of those paper plates. It's not easy.
I'm sure
They didn't have scissors back in
Yeah.
Mesopotamia?
Cut of scissors while blindfolded.
Yeah.
All right, great, thank you. All right, we're gonna go to the MCAS presentation?
Yeah, as you can see in the package when you skim through it, there's a lot of information in there. What I've asked Jerry Lynn and the principals to do is spend about 15 minutes on each school and hit the highlights. There's a lot of data in there, and really what they're going to do is emphasize some of our successes, and then how are we going to move forward with the data that we have. So 60 minutes, 10 minutes of questions should hopefully do it. And I'll turn it over to Jerry Lynn at this time.
Thank you. It's nice to see you again. We're pleased to present information regarding the performance of our Littleton students on the 2016 MCAS test. Approximately 900 students in grades 3 through 10 were tested in multiple subjects this spring. MCAS assesses what students need to know and be able to do as defined in the Massachusetts frameworks, and the content and the skills in our state framework set the bar high for academic performance. The goal of MCAS is to both measure the performance of students against state standards and to provide useful feedback that can improve teaching and learning. In Littleton, we embrace both aspects of this dual goal and are committed to providing information on MCAS to all stakeholders who share responsibility for advancing what our students know and are able to do. Major themes are the same as major themes that we've presented before. We have an emphasis on the processes and protocols followed at each school and each level for the review of data. Themes that you will see throughout is an emphasis in these processes and protocols on making data actionable and relevant, and a review of both individual and aggregate data. You'll see throughout the presentation exemplifies and increased use of Edwin Analytics. And you see that there's a priority is put on the shared responsibility that to communicate the analysis of the student performance data to parents and community members. You see that there are multiple grades and multiple subjects tested. This hasn't changed from previous years, except I would like to know that MCAS itself is evolving, and now, whereas before there were separate ELA composition tests at different grade levels, now the separate ELA composition is only administered at grade 10, and that there are writing prompts administered at each grade level. Rather than a review of MCAS trends at the state level, because grades 3 through 8 in ELA and math, there were a greater proportion of students who were involved in the PARCC testing rather than MCAS testing. I wanted to spend time on what's going on at the state level in terms of giving you an overall some information about next generation MCAS. We actually are one generation into MCAS. Some of us remember and some of us were there as teachers, not students. In 1998, when 4th, 8th, and 10th graders took the first operational MCAS. So MCAS is we're 20 years in, almost 20 years in. What's informally called MCAS 2.0, I presented briefly to school committee earlier about changes in the MCAS test. I've set forth what are some of the major changes here in this slide, and that the computer-based testing is an endeavor, involves students in offering a more richer, more engaging content, and offers a wider range of accessibility features. I also updated the school committee earlier about the transitional plan for computer-based testing in the state. Superintendent Clinch and I participated in a webinar today that talked about changing test designs for grades 3 to 8, and there will be teams at the middle school and Russell Street tomorrow who will be involved in those very same webinars. What I wanted to signal is something I mentioned in the slide, which showed the different MCAS tests, is that in ELA, writing in response to text is reflective of the emphasis in current state frameworks, and is also a key indicator of college and career readiness. And that's really an important theme in the change to MCAS 2.0. The legacy MCAS grade 10 ELA test, you see, will remain and is extended to the class of 2020. This year's 8th graders will be the first cohort to take the next generation MCAS, and they will be taking computer-based testing this spring. Every year we do offer some district-to-state comparisons. This year, paper and pencil tests were the science tests and the grade 10 legacy tests. When you review, if you had any questions about numbers on these charts and comparing them to the charts in other sections, also sometimes people call our schools and the office and say, your percentages differ. I wanted to draw a distinction between the district reports and the school-based reports. The district reports include all students who took the MCAS test while enrolled in the district, and that's regardless of where they were, when they were enrolled during the school year, and students in out-of-district placements. School reports include only those students enrolled in the school itself on or before October 1st and who took MCAS in that very same school. We provide two-year comparisons in the routinely in the presentation. We like to call your attention to the utility of 2- and 3-year comparisons. Remember, these comparisons are across cohorts. We look for trends and check the analyses for the implications regarding curricular sequence and instructional focus areas. I wanted to spend a little time on these MCAS analyses and the emerging resulting instructional focus areas and strategies. I want to emphasize again that all departments, the faculties and all of the departments review the 2016 released MCAS questions, and it is getting a picture of an individual child, their learning objectives, their learning profile, the trends emerging from subgroup performance, and trends for students in the aggregate. The faculty review the MCAS results for its implications for curricular sequencing and the alignment of curriculum. I want to emphasize certain things that go on in language arts. They spent a lot of time reviewing the actual student work through the MCAS Service Center and the long composition scores and examples of student work. Emerging out of that is a consistent focus on open response questions and the writing that's involved in that. And I wanted to signal this now because when you see the color-coded charts as part of the high school presentation, it's very, very impressive to have your 97 or 98% of students in a school achieving proficiency. But when 8 out of 10 of those students are in advanced, that's no accident.
Sorry to interrupt you. Are the teachers actually looking at their students' as actual answers on these tests? Do they get those? So they're reviewing, and are they able to review those with the students themselves to see why, like share that with them?
They take a look at, their different departments look at error analysis. How often they bring it actually in student conferences with the individual student differs.
Maybe not as
teacher to
frequent,
teacher.
but in theory they could?
Yes.
Yeah, Mike, there's a significant delay before the results actually land at the schools, so it kind of takes the validity of that away. The
Yeah,
students are already in the next
You may not
successive
have that
grade,
student
and
sitting in
Right,
front of
yeah,
you
makes
anymore,
sense.
so that,
What our teachers focus on, though, sorry, Jerry Lynn, is looking at an item analysis of the composite class, and that way they can identify the strengths of that particular class and also areas that they need to reflect on. So it because of the lateness of the results, it really gives the teacher an opportunity to take a look at their curriculum and assessment strategies, and less of an opportunity to focus on the individual. That's one of the reasons why we have NWA in our system as well, so we can focus on the individual.
And now, what about that work going into the next year? Is there any interaction between the previous year's teacher and the following year about how that grade is doing, or, if there was something that was missed by that batch of
Yes.
students?
Yes.
Are they then
yes,
projecting forward?
that's the
That's the
reason for
purpose
the
of that, okay.
comparison. That's the utility
Okay, great.
for the comparison across cohorts, because you're emphasizing skills, and you're emphasizing a curricular sequence or certain instructional focus. So when Dr. Harrington and I talk with the ELA curriculum coordinator, the math curriculum coordinator, and these slides emerged, they talk about, in math, the error analysis. They'll talk about certain vocabulary in math. In ELA, they'll talk about certain types of essays. This goes to the utility of these analysis for the year after, that serves students well in taking the SAT
Oh, right.
tests as well. And it is also the basis for collaboration. Too often we think of departments as separate silos. It's also the basis of collaboration, real authentic collaboration, student-centered collaboration between regular ed and special ed. And these analysis point teachers in a direction. And what I would like to emphasize about the ELA analysis is it has resulted in a continued emphasis on close reading skills, but much more of an emphasis now on nonfiction, historical speeches, and rhetoric. The math department is involved in the error analysis of every single test item, where students may have answered a question incorrectly, and what would be following the type of mathematical reasoning that would result in those errors. And this year, because the grade 10 still maintains the district to the state comparisons, whereas the other grade levels don't have that availability of those comparisons, we were able to see in the math department that Littleton students outscored the state on every single question. And they take a look at what are the differences. Selected, and departments do the 6 to 12. Selected MCAS questions are brought back to students the next year, and some of those problems can be put into different math courses and a different math sequence. The same thing happens in 8th grade, building the 8th grade science conceptual knowledge, and pointing out students in the 9th grade who are at risk of not passing MCAS. those are the department-based analysis, and, it's throughout the secondary level, and it gives you an idea of the processes and protocols, not unlike grade level analysis that are conducted in the school-based sessions. The last thing I would say before I hand it off to the principals, the last slide does contain links to different portions of the DESE website that deals with MCAS and accountability. And that Learn More icon that you see, you can press on it and you can get a little mini video or text that explains different themes within MCAS. And that concludes my introductory portion to the presentation. Should I ask for any questions before I leave? Or you
Sure.
want that at the end?
Actually, why don't you do it now?
Yeah. Anybody have any questions for Dr. Jamie? You can certainly ask her other questions later if you want.
That
No, I have
has
some questions, but I
happened.
think I'm going to do them during the principal
Okay,
presentation.
thank you.
Anybody else? Thank you, Dr. Jamie. I'll give you the night off on this one. We should give Rich the night off.
It's all right.
Make a note of that.
Good information.
He enjoys watching everyone else get.
He would miss us.
He just likes it when they all say to him, well, it's because it starts at Shaker Lane.
Exactly.
That's right. That's
What he's
right.
waiting
Yeah.
for.
He likes the
I'm
mask.
on to that. I'm on to that.
It's worth coming here for that, isn't it?
Good evening. Thank you for inviting us. As always, it's a pleasure to talk about the hard work that students and faculty are doing at Russell Street. I try to say as often as I can that Russell Street and the Littleton Public Schools are really special places. If you haven't had the opportunity to be other places, you may not realize quite how special. And so it's always my honor to come and talk about the work that's being done in the building by the teachers and the students. Echoing Dr. Jamin a little bit, I like to begin my presentation by reminding folks that MCAS is a moment in time. Sometimes it's a great moment in time, and I still say it's a moment in time, and then there's sometimes when we need to work on some things and it's still a moment in time. It's one way that we're measured. We do look at both the trends that we can find as well as the specifics. Often where we are either below 80% proficiency in a question or a strand, or where we're below the state. Dr. Jamian alluded to our state data being a little bit different this year because it's not a full sample of all students, but we certainly still take a peek at that. This year, our analysis, each of our grade level teams took a half day to analyze data on their own and look for trends, and then we did 90-minute sessions that were collaborative with me and our interventionists in each grade level team. So we added a layer for our fall analysis. Oh, I have the thing. I was waiting for Steve to move the thing. Let me apologize and let me apologize at the beginning for how much data there is on this page and how difficult it is to read. I won't talk about all of it, but there are some unique trends, and I wanted to make sure that you had as much information as possible. As we go into talking about specifically student growth percentiles, I'll remind you that the state would indicate that above 40 is moderate growth and above 60 is higher growth, and I think that we would all agree we'd like to see growth at a minimum above 50. When we think about the students that we have, the faculty that we have, and the supportive community that we have, I'd like to think our students are growing at least as well as half the students in the state. So that sort of gives you a barometer for growth. I have 4 years of data listed at the top that show you the proficiency and advanced percentages as well as the growth percentages in parentheses for each subject. We remain relatively flat in our percentages of proficiency and advanced. You can see they waver a little bit from year to year, but they're generally pretty similar when you consider what a percentage point is. The bigger trend that stands out there is a significant steady trend of rising growth scores in mathematics and a somewhat declining trend of growth scores in literacy. So I'll talk a little bit more about that, but in a nutshell, as when we met as a team, really the message was the work that we're doing in math is really paying off, and we're going to expand what we're doing, and how are we going to think a little bit differently about ELA and our new ELA program to make sure that we see increasing growth scores there. So as we go through it, keep those trends in mind. I'll talk about the areas of relative strength first, and they all fall in mathematics. And so one of the things that I'll point out there, when you look at growth scores, you know, the 1, 2, 3, fourth bullet down shows you that the growth scores for non-high need students is 70. And one of the things that we're really proud of, as you look at the subgroups, they have SGPs of 61, 54, and 54. So while they have much lower percentages of advanced and proficiency, often it may be students with disabilities or it may be students with other challenges, their growth scores are similarly strong. And I think that reflects the work that's being done in our intervention blocks and by our faculty, and certainly something we want to try to replicate in ELA. Open response, if you look at that last bullet, that shows you the percentage of points that students got at each grade level. So that first 78% is 3rd grade, 4th grade, and 5th grade. So that's the percentage of points that students got of available points, which is really strong. So across the board, in many ways, our mathematics instruction and our mathematics achievement of students is a real highlight. As we move on to areas to consider and look at ELA, we continue to look at open response scores at each grade level where we're acquiring less than half the points on open response. And so that's been a real area of focus for a couple of years, probably 3 years, building wide and with specific grade levels, working on educator goals to address open response. That's something we'll continue to address, and certainly want to see scores that are more like our math open response scores. Those questions in ELA are much harder. One of the things we talked about as teams is often that we'll ask children to take the perspective of another speaker other than the narrator, or we'll ask students to compare pieces of literature. So in mathematics, if you can show your math in numbers and explain it, you can get your points there. But often we're asking students who maybe have trouble taking the perspective of others in their own lives, and then maybe have challenges with reading, to read, take the perspective of another character, and then put it in writing in a coherent way. So there are some could argue, a more ambiguous process, and we are, that number is reflected statewide. The literacy open response scores are lower, but that continues to be an area that we would like to see grow pretty significantly. You see it compared to the multiple choice points that we got below it, and certainly there's a lot of points left on the table with writing, and I'll talk a little bit more about writing later. Part of the reason there's so much data on this page is because I want to note that even though you see some drops in, pretty double-digit drops in growth scores in ELA, we were so strong the year before that in lots of cases we're still plus over 2 years. So we need to take that with a little bit of a grain of salt. We do have a brand new program teachers were rolling out last year, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But as you go through those bullets, you see, it's Title I students. We talked about how great the growth was last year. We dropped 16.5 of those points this year. So again, that's a subgroup. There's less students in it. Percentage points come up quickly. The same staff are instructing the same students and doing similar things. Sometimes it's not super clear why that happens, but certainly something that we're going to continue to dig into. The other thing that I'll point out that hasn't always been the case, first of all, a real positive is almost 40% of students at Russell Street are advanced in math. And I think that's a real feather in folks' cap, and it goes along with what we said before. But our number of students advanced in literacy is down. Some of that I would definitely chalk up to teachers trying to wrap their heads around a full new program last year, because I think it makes it more difficult for them to find the time to push when they're still going through a new program and figuring out what pieces they're using, what pieces they're not, what pieces they're supplementing. And so there's some things going on there. We also have, I talked about in the last slide, significant numbers of new staff over the past 5 years. So, a lot of them are trying to make sure that they meet all the standards and getting every student to the standards, but I would like to see that advanced number in ELA grow. These next few slides, I don't need to read to you. They basically show the percent of proficiency and the growth scores at each grade. 3rd grade, nearing 80. We've had that reading score up to 80% before. Not super concerning, but again, it shows the strength in math comparatively. This is 4th grade. One of the reasons I put those parentheses are not growth scores. Growth has its own column, obviously, but I thought it was interesting to point out, for instance, if you look at grade 4 ELA, you might say, well, their advanced and proficient numbers went up 11%, that's great, but our growth scores went down 6. I'd much rather see us the way the math is and not grow our advanced and proficient scores quite as quickly, but see our students growing significantly faster than like peers in the state. So both of those numbers are important. We value both. And sometimes they don't correlate. Sometimes they do, but sometimes they don't. I believe that's the only place we'll see a growth number below 40. So, I remind people again that the state would call that moderate growth. We'd like to see that growth number closer to 50 or above. This is 5th grade. Same thing, you see, very, very strong mathematics growth and, lower moderate ELA growth, mid to upper 70s advanced and proficient. Our science advanced and proficiency numbers went down slightly. That's a tough one to compare. Again, a total different set of kids taking the test for the first time. This is overall. The big numbers there, like I said before, 64.5% growth scores for students in math across the building is outstanding. It continues to grow, and that 40, is the big number that we're taking a look at. As we look, the next slides are the cohort slides. I'll remind all of our viewers and the folks here that each year we talk about there tends to be a dip from 3rd grade to 4th and back up to 5th. That mirrors a state dip that we often see. The 4th grade test has significantly more rigor than the 3rd grade test and significantly more opportunity for students to write open response answers. So there's more points available beginning in 4th grade. So it's definitely a different test. If you talk to anyone who's taught 4th grade for a while, MCAS can give them a little bit of a complex because they always feel like it's the 4th grade that takes the dip. There's been many different people teaching 4th grade, and we see very similar trends. So we're going to go through 8 slides fairly quickly that highlight the same themes that I just mentioned to you. And basically that's that we're seeing stronger growth in mathematics than ELA, and more students in advanced categories in mathematics than in ELA. This is current 6th grade. If you look at the dark blue and light blue, that's your proficient and advanced numbers. So at a glance, you can see, we take a little dip and we come back up, and you see the advanced growing in 5th grade, but not to the level that we might like it to. This is actually, I believe, the mathematics growth slide. I apologize. Our ELA growth is the one that we've been talking about needing to grow. So this matches the slide later in the packet. But if the ELA one was there, you'd see similar improvement from 4th to 5th, but not as strong a growth in either grade. These are our current 6th graders in math. This reflects what we talked about, that really strong grade level and school-wide growth scores. You can see that if you go, the 3rd color of green is moderate, so you're way up there, like at 75% of students that are at least moderate growth for our current 6th graders. This is our current 5th graders in ELA. Again, a slight dip into 4th grade there. And their growth is overall weaker. You see less of the dark greens than you did in the mathematics charts. This is the current 5th grade in math. There's that chart I showed you before with the strong growth. So as we think about at grade levels and as a team, where will our focuses be? One of the big ones is around our new literacy program. Journey's reading and writing program has brought significantly more rigor to our curriculum. It is a program, there was significant professional development that was done with it, but it is a program that even when the consultants presented it to us said no teacher can do this whole program. So part of what happened last year was grade levels trying to figure out what parts of a 42-page unit assessment are we all going to use so that we have a common assessment? Where are we going to, what are we going to assign? What are we not going to assign? The other thing that happened is we asked teachers to use the program as designed last year to get a good feel for it. And if you recall me presenting the last time I was here, I talked about the fact that very rarely do we use a program cover to cover. And so one of the things that we're trying to do this year is support teachers to use the Journeys program much more like they use the Everyday Math program, and supplement it and teach the students that are in front of them in the way that they need. Part of the growing pains in that is you can't use the Journeys formative assessments if you don't use the literature, because the excerpts are from the Journeys literature. So if people are going to use mentor texts or other literature rather than the Journeys story, they need to create a formative assessment that measures a similar skill set as the Journeys one. So that work is ongoing. I feel like Journeys in the long run is a big plus for us. I think, if you, for instance, if a school goes to a writer's workshop model, it's very often the scores go down before they go up because there's a learning curve for staff involved. So I think that is something that we'll continue to see grow, the teachers' success with Journeys, and finding the best way to use it with their students. We are developing a K-5 writing committee, first to assess our current practice and then to evaluate where we may like to go from there. There's only so much time. One of the things we talked about in our teams is there's only so much time in the school day. So part of the challenge at Russell Street is students don't have a full hour writing block like you might have at another school, but they have a full 30-minute intervention block in literacy and a full 30-minute intervention block in math, which a lot of schools might not have. So we've chosen to go to small group instruction that's targeted for exactly what students need versus having a longer writing block. So that seesaw tips a little bit, but that's part of where the challenge comes, K-5, is finding the time to give our students to be writing. And that's an area that we need to continue to talk about and figure out if we're going to supplement what Journeys offers as far as writing resources. And we've visited some schools, and you'll see a couple bullets down. We've talked about visiting a blue ribbon school, and at the elementary level, that means they've done a nice job in closing gaps. So to see what maybe they're doing around scheduling and writing in particular, those things are all on our mind. And so we'll be pulling those teams together. And the science standards, as you know, have been updated. So we'll have a K-5 team in science to take a look at what do we need to realign as far as the K-5 spectrum goes, to make sure that we're in line with the new standards. What might we need to supplement? FOSS is our primary resource in science. They'll come in and show us what they've done differently to align with the new standards. And then that team will take a look at what might we need to add to it to make sure our students get the full experience and the mastery of the standards. We're piloting Dreambox Learning for our Title I students at Russell Street. Susan Mitchell, our math interventionist, has worked hard on this with Dr. Ajamian to be able to offer this for students. It's a adaptive, sort of leveled supplemental mathematics experience that's online. So we'll be using it a little bit in our Math Win block, which you'll remember is our intervention block. That stands for What I Need. And students will have access to it at home. And we'll be working on some other blocks for Title I students to be able to work on that. The ideal, as I understand it, ideally students will use it 4 times a week for 15 minutes or so. As we move down to the second set of bullets, we will continue to focus on increased rigor. One of the things I said 3 or 4 years ago when I was here is teachers were saying, when they were looking at test analysis, the questions students were seeing were harder than some of the literature that we were using on a day-to-day basis. So we're trying to make sure that we're really exposing our students to rigorous material in mathematics and literacy. Even if students are maybe have disabilities or have learning challenges or have a variety of different things going on where they may not be at grade level, it's important that they're being exposed to that level of rigor, because then it's not totally brand new to them when they get assessed on it. One of our big movements 3 years ago now was to go to our posted learning targets at Russell Street in student language, the I can statements. We've talked about them before. So learning targets are posted in every classroom for both math and science. The idea is that teachers are talking about them multiple times before they get to that subject block, so that students know when math begins or when literacy begins, what the goal is that they should be able to know at the end of that day, or as we talked about last time, that unit or mini unit. And we're using a lot more formative assessment. Teachers are using exit tickets, paper, electronic, formative assessments. And we've always done reteaching, but I think it's more focused reteaching. I think we have better day-to-day assessment data, and that's allowing teachers to get students exactly what they need more regularly. We expanded our math win block last year was so successful. It was a 2-day pilot. We expanded it to 4 days a week. This year, we're continuing the work that we were doing there and hoping to see continued improvement. And we are piloting a change in our ELA intervention block. 5 or 6 years ago, Ideal Consulting came to Littleton and worked with K-5 teachers on implementing an RTI block, and it was very successful. Having been 5 or 6 years since then, and our scores not necessarily being exactly where we'd like them to be, we're taking a look at how we provide instruction in those intervention blocks and changing to try to make sure that, it used to be that people that needed Tier 2 intervention went to a small group that was often taught either by an interventionist or a teaching assistant, and then students that were Tier 1 students would stay in their classroom and do some horizontal work in literacy, so literature circles or something like that. Now the way it's working is the special educators and the teaching assistants are working together with students on IEPs. Our interventionists are taking all the Title I students, so sort of our second tier of at-risk students during that 30-minute win block, RTI block. And then the grade level, under the guidance of our literacy specialist, is figuring out student needs, including having an advanced group and having students move from classroom to classroom for that 30 minutes. So each licensed teacher then is teaching a specific topic with the goal of getting students what they need, whether it be remediation, whether it be reteaching on specific topics, or whether it be an advanced experience. So we're hoping that change in our intervention model is going to pay some results in those advanced numbers that we'd like to see higher in literacy, as well as the growth numbers, because we're hoping that both it's more targeted to specifically what students need, and having a licensed teacher teach those groups has a more experienced person who on the fly can change what's going on rather than feel like they need to use a prescriptive intervention program if it doesn't seem to be working at that moment. As we move forward, we'll be exploring using our NWA MAP goal setting with students. That's been on our minds for a little bit, and there's a lot of districts that are very successful helping students take a look at their RIT scores and what their projected RIT scores are, and actually sort of gamifying a little bit, like, we know you can get there, and here's the things you need to work on to get there, and you know, being supportive. If you don't get there, you still made great growth, but trying to include students and having an idea where they're headed and what we're going to do to help them get there. Increasing vertical collaboration, we've talked about a lot. One of the things that happened at the end of last year is I realigned the teams a little bit in order to balance some of our veteran staff with some of our new staff and try to spread out some of the skills of our educators so that they could support each other in a variety of ways. That naturally increases some of that vertical collaboration because folks are bringing ideas from other teams to their new team, but we're certainly going to continue to look at more vertical collaboration. We have an increased focus on vocabulary. It was funny, I saw Susan Mitchell, our math interventionist, teaching the other day, and she was talking to students about a problem, and she used a mathematical term, and she said, you might have heard it called this, or you might have heard it called that, or you might have heard it called this, or some people call it that. And so sometimes our students get hung up on words like compute or, you know, work the problem, and so sometimes it's a vocabulary issue and not a mathematics issue. And that's true to some degree in ELA as well. So there's a focus there on vocabulary. We're obviously looking at the gap in open response and trying to move our literacy scores. And there's also, interestingly, and this isn't really new, but in grade 3, there really isn't a gender gap in achievement in literacy, but in grades 4 and 5, there's a pretty significant gender gap with girls being more successful in literacy than boys. So we've been talking a lot about trying to find ways to raise the engagement in ELA for boys, whether it be trying to find different types of literature they may be interested in, or nonfiction articles or things that they feel more connected to. I went to MassQ, the technology conference earlier this year, and one of the things I brought back and shared with the staff was this whole idea of passion blogging and giving students the opportunity to create an online footprint by writing about things that they just care about. And so at the elementary level, the people that are doing this, it's a closed group in the classroom, and then the high schools that are doing it, it's a more open blog where they're trying to help students, write about something they care about, how to write to an audience, how to take feedback, how to understand what feedback they should ignore because not everybody has something quality to say on the internet. But that idea of maybe raising engagement in boys in particular by getting them to write about the things that they're really passionate about. So something that we just shared coming out of the conference. I talked about many new staff members and team realignment. We're only in the second year of our new and updated programs. And we have a major focus on social and emotional learning. Each year I've come here, I've said we could raise the MCAS scores at the expense of social emotional learning, and that's a conscious decision that we've always made, that the balance was important. And quite frankly, the social emotional learning is building the skills for students to be self-learners and self-growers. And so even students, when you get to Dr. Harrington, we see even students that may not be advanced or proficient right now on the state assessment, the vast majority of them when they get to high school excel with the state assessment. So my message is always the same: stay calm and keep doing great work. And overall, full steam ahead in math. What can we do to raise those growth scores in literacy? Happy to answer any questions.
I don't have any questions, but I appreciate that you don't try and gloss over the areas of consideration, which is nicely worded. It's important. I think you've explained that there's logic behind how you're going to tackle those problems and things like that, and I think it's important for us and other people to know, have a clear understanding of where we are right now.
Yeah, absolutely.
And, I think that's important.
Thanks.
Alex?
Taylor, you want to go first?
Sure. See, I've got my jaw.
You'll say what I want to say better, so.
On my sheets here. No, I appreciate the thing, and you actually hit a couple of my questions, so I'll skip them there. Great presentation, and I really do appreciate, I think as a system, we're by the time our final product is done, I think we have an exceptional system, and then now we got some things along the way. One of the ones I'm a little concerned about, you talk about the dip at 4th grade, which I can see the score dip, with the alignment of the testing and the pieces there, but I don't quite get the SGP dip there, because that would mean they're not keeping up with the peers in other districts and other places there that are experiencing the same dip.
Are you looking at a specific slide, Darryl?
I got it on number 25 here, I think is the one that I have. If I got the right data off of that.
So you're talking about ELA growth?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, so ELA growth across the board, and we don't get it in 3rd, that's the first year they take it, but point well taken, and that's certainly, an area that we're trying to work on.
And the one thing I guess I maybe think about in terms of what I'm hearing here is I heard that you're aware of the problem, and I think you've diagnosed that where the various problems are, but the sort of the action plan that you had relative to the steps there was a little bit more vague. I didn't get a sense of how are you going back with your new staff to, you identified you got a lot of new staff. What is your plan for working with that new staff to make sure that they're transitioning properly, in terms of absorbing or changing the material there, other than monitoring it? And I'd like a little bit more action description.
Well, that's a great point. I missed a note here somewhere because two things. One, I want to make really clear that we've overhauled our intervention model in literacy, and that's what I was explaining earlier. And so that's the first thing. The second thing is our new staff have gone through all of the training for Journeys, and so I think we're going to see everybody get more comfortable with Journeys. But we are sending our literacy interventionist and a classroom teacher who's licensed as a literacy interventionist to a multiple-day train-the-trainer next week on small group reading instruction, with the idea that they'll be able to come back and do some training for some of our newer staff who weren't here back when the consultant came 6 years ago. If you looked at the number of classroom teachers who are new since IDEAL was here, it's not quite half, but close to half the staff. So we're definitely taking steps in that direction. To be completely honest with you, I'm really not concerned about the instruction that's taking place in classrooms. I think the pieces need to come together the way they came together in math. I've stood here and spoken previously about, we have some of the best teachers I've ever seen. We have a very supportive community, and we have very bright students. I don't think it's about teachers doing something significantly differently. I think it's about us trying to meet the needs of the individual student right where they are, and that's what we've been very successful with in math. It's a little bit easier to do in math because you can say, okay, you know, Johnny and Susie are having trouble with fractions, we're going to have this small group on fractions, whereas if it's comprehension or inference or a broader area of reading, it's not as easy to narrow right in. But it's not the instruction piece that I'm concerned about. I think once, especially the teachers that want to feel flexibility to supplement the anthology, which is the reading and writing program, and use literature of their choice, and we figure out how to do that along with the formative assessments, I think those pieces should be coming back together. I feel confident in the rigor of the literature that we rolled out last year with Journeys. We're doing a lot of work with nonfiction. The observations that I do of faculty instruction is outstanding. So I do think that this is going to come right along, but it's a point well taken. And you know that we need to keep the pressure there. We need to be thinking about how we use our interventionists and making sure that you know, we're working with students who need Tier 3 intervention as well as working with students who could be enriched. So those are all discussions that are going on in-house. So a point well taken and agreed.
Okay, thank you.
Is there a way for us to look at the growth difference comparing like students for a particular type of question? So what would is there a way for us to look at what SGP would be if we just looked at open response questions?
We get the number compared to the state. I'm not sure we get an SGP for that. I have that
might
here.
be pretty complex. And I'm not asking for that number. I'm just thinking that might be helpful to put in context where we are, because obviously we're excelling more in math than we are in English. But if we're doing so in a rate that's similar to how like students are doing across the state.
So it's a little difficult to tell this year, only, like I said, because we're not sure who else. I mean, we could go out and get the data, but more schools took PARC than took MCAS. But if you look at this, I want to make sure I give you the ELA ones. In open response in third grade, we got 46 possible points. The state got 49. In fourth grade, ELA open response, we got 44. The state got 48. And in fifth grade, the school got 42 and the state got 51. So, you know, slightly below the state. Those are really the only places. There is a little bit more in fifth grade that's drawn down by that number. But again, I urge you to exercise caution with that state number, just because we don't know who it is and what districts and what profile of districts shows that. It's very rare for us to have numbers that are significant numbers of numbers that are below the state. You know, normally we can go through and pick out the 4 questions at a grade level where we were below the state, and let's figure out what happened there. And we see things like we taught algebra, but we didn't teach it to 2 variables, and the question was 2 variables. So we live and learn that we didn't quite, you know, nail the standard the way it was written. Or, you know, we had a 4th grade team say, you know, we got some advice last year that we should move geometry to the end and focus on something different based on the importance for college and career and long term, and then we took a hit in geometry. So it's pretty common that we can correlate on those times that we're below the state why that is. But open response is definitely challenging. And like I said, it's something we've been working on regularly. One of the things that I said to teams is all the work that we do now in classrooms, almost all, is student voice and student group and collaboration and dialogue and debate. And open response writing is a really explicit skill. I'm going to tell you how to do it, and I want you to give it back to me. And so it flies a little in the face of what we've been preaching to our educators about how we want classrooms to look. And so part of me wonders if they're not used to doing that as much. Maybe they need to be more prescriptive, and maybe they need to you know, handle how they're working on it a little differently. I had a new teacher, only in her 2nd year, say to me the other day, I think we need to figure out how to make it fun. I think kids don't like it, you know, so how are we going to raise engagement, you know, and how can we let them bring their own nonfiction articles in that they love, and then we create the questions around their articles, or, you know, what can we do to make it something that students don't go, oh, it's another open response, you know?
I was going to ask you about, because I know that MCAS, at least, when I was taking the MCAS, throughout the entire district, 3 to 10, it was always very much, this is exactly how it was formulaic writing, which is not how I want to be teaching our kids. So if that's one of the issues, that's one of those trade-offs that, as you said, we look at it and sometimes we're okay with that.
Right.
I was going to ask about the stress level, or how students take or accept or reject this new focus, or this stronger focus on the open response, because that might be part of it.
Well, one of the things we don't do is try to pound kids for a month before MCAS on open response, right? Like, one of the things we talked about at our team meetings was, how can we weave an open response into every unit assessment, so that it's ongoing practice for kids? Or, how can we make it a homework assignment where they get to pick the literature, like I said? So it isn't, some schools go, it's MCAS boot camp, we're going to hammer open response. It's not like that. In fact, one of the things I talked about last year was all the work teachers have done around MCAS socially emotionally, with MCAS rallies and, all kinds of, Math Survivor. They play Math Survivor to practice the 2 days before MCAS, and so every room has a different math challenge, and they move through all the math challenges. So they really try. There is some anecdotal research that if teachers stand in a classroom and go, oh, MCAS, the more we can get them to understand, you're showing us what you know, we're totally confident that you're ready to go. I mean, we have teachers now with signs on their doors, instead of saying, MCAS testing, it says, we're showing how awesome we are. So it's a mindset shift, a growth mindset that we're working on there. I just think for a lot of students, boys especially, like I said before, if you have any kind of lack of preference or engagement around reading or writing, and if you have any social areas that are challenging for you, like I said, perspective taking the role of another, it's putting all those skills together. It's not just writing when you think about open response. When I taught 4th grade, and I know we don't do the long comp like we used to, but I used to say to kids, listen, we know it's the 5-paragraph essay. If they give you the prompt that says, what was your best day at the beach, and you can't think of a third detail, make one up, because the MCAS police aren't coming, and they want a 5-paragraph essay, like you said. And then 3 weeks later, they do open response, and we'd have to say, listen, if the article's on African snakes, I don't care if your mother is a scientist in Africa and you know everything there is about snakes, if it's not in the article, don't put it in there. So it is a very different mindset for kids. Now the writing prompts are going to be more varied. They're not always going to be personal narratives. They might be arguments. They might be compare and contrast. So I do think that the writing part of the next generation MCAS is going to be more challenging, not less. And so it is an area, K-5, writing in general, that we certainly want to strengthen. So I'm not sure it's necessarily an open response question issue as much as it is raising the aptitude of our students and their writing in general.
Thank you.
You have to be cautious. Data is multi-layered. And when we're looking at aggregate or cohort growth scores, there's a lot of things that we're not talking about here. And we have to be cautious. This data doesn't show some things, but it's the best way to do it with not keeping you here for 24 hours. And when I look at this as a superintendent, and when I look at this with my leadership team, part of the MCAS approach lends itself to traditional classrooms. I don't want to go to a traditional classroom to have students achieve 10 points higher on an MCAS score with no guarantees that they're going to remember what they've written or what they knew to write the exam. It's not long-term memory, it's short-term memory. So it's about balance, and how does MCAS fit into our philosophy of learning? And that's why we have to be cautious here. If a district wants to focus on increasing their open response scores quickly, they go back to a traditional classroom. It's proven time and time again. Some charter schools are very traditional. Their MCAS scores go up higher. So it's about balance. We want our students to be good writers, but we also want them to have all of those other qualities that make good students and lifelong learners. So it's a delicate balance, and we, as you can see, we take this data very seriously and spend a lot of time on it, but there are so many other actors involved in this whole process. So we've identified some challenges. We definitely have a plan in place to work on them, but not at the expense of changing the progress that we've made to a classroom that develops a love of learning, to one where perhaps when we were in school was sit in a row and the teacher lectures for 15 minutes and then you do 25 minutes of questions. So, you know, sometimes I don't want to say too much here, but sometimes standardized testing doesn't match the way of the future of learning.
So, I really appreciate what you're saying there. I guess the part that I want to make sure that we're doing then, because I don't know how you benchmark it though, is the writing that they're doing at that grade level, is it ignoring the MCAS scoring methodology for the open response, is it at the rigor and quality level that we're expecting? And how are we assessing that if we don't want to use MCAS as the benchmark? And you know, so I mean, I'm fine with that, you know, but I don't know what our other benchmark would be.
Right. It's important to take a look at the rubrics for marking open response questions, and I think that's one of the reasons why I've asked the K-5 principals to seriously look at a new writing program that's more aligned with the changes that we see in the standards, and that's coming when you look at our multidisciplinary approach to some of our classroom activities. That's naturally going to bring in that nonfiction component fairly well, and the teachers are getting, you know, actually much better, but the rubrics are changing, in all fairness to our staff. So they need to take a look at these rubrics and need to incorporate those changes into their own assessments at the beginning of the year. And it's a moving target right now with MCAS 2.0, so it's going to take us a while to adjust to that. But I'm confident we're on the right track. I don't see anything, and I know you don't either, but I don't see anything as a superintendent that says, oh my goodness, we need to change direction here. We need some tweaking. And I have asked the principals to assemble a team, K-5, and visit some blue ribbon schools, at least one this year, to see what they're doing in terms of various subgroups within their schools. I mean, that's key to us right now. One of the things we're working on is taking a look at students with IEPs and mapping their progress out and making sure that connectivity exists between regular education and special education. And that's been a big initiative of ours this year, and it's going to continue to be. And then we take that information, and when we assess the student's progress on that IEP, that's taken into consideration as we design a new IEP for that student in a successive year. So we're doing a lot of things to target some of these areas, but it's much broader than MCAS. You know, it encompasses rigorous curriculum and students learning at the pace that they have.
I think just to add to that, you know, and we've talked about this before, but if you think about a professional educator and a team of professional educators, you can't get great at a million things at once. We talk about having a couple, 3 big rocks to focus on, and I think if we looked back even farther than 4 years, the significant improvement in math and the dedication that the staff has put into that, it's hard to go 110% in every area. So it doesn't surprise me that with a brand new program last year in ELA, an updated math program, and brand new intervention block in math, that we have, you know, a big focus in math. Now we need to redirect that focus and try to make literacy look more like math. And to the superintendent's point, one of my daughters is an outstanding elementary open response writer, but she also spends a good part of her day being afraid that her teacher will write her name on the board because she sipped her water while the teacher was talking. So that's, I think, what we're talking about in finding a balance between empowering students, and I firmly believe that some of the work that we're doing around social emotional learning is going to help students be better lifelong learners and self-growers and writers, and it might take a little longer. but they're going to get there. And I think if we don't spend that time on the social emotional piece, it's harder to make that up than it is to make up the skills in some areas. So I really feel very confident about the instruction our teachers are doing. They're the best I've ever seen, and we certainly acknowledge that we want those growth scores in ELA to be looking different than they look right now. But I don't want to lose sight of the success of math, and the last thing I want is for MCAS to cause a morale problem. So I think we want to look at it both scientifically and artistically. Think about the kids that are in front of us, and I'm hopeful that we'll start seeing improvement in that area soon.
I appreciate the comments that were made, and they reflected some of the notes I took. I don't want us to hesitate to innovate because we think we're going to take a short-term or even moderate-term hit on the MCAS. As long as we've made a determination that there are other benchmarks we can use that prove to us that it's the right thing to do. The other thing is, I want to be careful that we don't change the day of how the students spend their day solely to chase a growth model or something like that. Again, we have other ways of measuring. The MCAS is a specific measure of what it does. And when you ask about what the other benchmark is, well, in MCAS, it's what happens at the high school. That supports what we're doing K through 12. And I'm not worried about what happens in a particular grade, in a particular metric, 1 year, even 2 years, even 4 years in a row, as long as the overall trend is still positive and supported up at the end outcome, which is the one we really, for this particular measure, is the one we only really care about. Frankly, we have better ways of measuring, and we've seen it, and it's emerging year by year. We have much better ways of determining if we're actually teaching well and learning well. So I just want to make sure that, and I've heard it, and I appreciate that we don't lose sight of the balance that we're trying to strike, that MCAS is just one thing. And I wouldn't even call it the most important, frankly.
No, and quite frankly, I wouldn't mind that, if we switch the focus, I mean, you present the data, it's the data there, but it's really, are we hitting the benchmarks we targeting here? And it might be independent of the MCAS
Correct.
score of it. But like I said, I just want to make sure that I'm getting that feel for, I don't care, you convince me that score doesn't matter. This is where it's important. This is how we're achieving that. And then
Process.
And then it doesn't matter.
Well, and quite frankly, I think our students can write better. So I think to your point, that's part of why we're going to visit schools, we're going to look at a supplemental program.
That's what I'd like to see in the presentation.
Right.
Well, it's there. Those things are there. We talked about them.
No, I'm just.
In the next steps, that we're going to visit the K to 5, and what I mean?
No, in terms of how our other programs, are they being, there's one thing to change our program to align it to make sure it scores good in MCAS, which is not what we want to do.
Correct.
But at the same time, I think you're making a strong argument that you are developing strong writers.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's what we want.
But remember what I said about the time. So, if you think about our students compared to the state, that we're doing a full hour of intervention in 2 subjects.
You've assuaged our concern. As a matter of fact, you've bolstered our support for what's going on. You said it. You said, we could change how we teach writing and get them back to the open response model. It's like, I almost threw up in my mouth. I don't want to hear that. I don't want, I know you said it because we're not going to do it, and I appreciate that. That's the wrong thing to do. They will be better in the long run by virtue of what we're doing, and we'll take the scores here in support of that as long as you can, and you did, show us that, well, we're going in a different direction, it'll pay off down the road, and again, it does pay off. We see, it, not solely in just learning, but we can see that it pays them off. They'll make the MCAS score they need, no problem at all.
Right. Well, and our students are, driving robotics around the think tank, and they're doing things that a lot of elementary kids don't get to do. So like I said, I'll just wrap up with, I'm very confident in the instructors and the work that they're doing, and that it's more fine-tuning than anything crazy.
Thank you. I think you're taking the right approach.
As someone who's taken the MCAS more recently of most of the people in this room, I can say, from my perspective, English, you have this, especially when you get to the high school, you know what you're doing, and you have the right processes to kind of figure out what you want to say and how you want to say it. But the math one, I can say this from the general rumors of my grade. If you understand the concept, math one is the easiest thing you will do during that hour, 2-hour-long block, because you don't have to write an explanation. If you write out your math neatly enough, they count that as your evidence, and then you're done. So the math for most kids, if they get the concept, is super easy.
Scott took all your time, so you're gonna.
I knew you were going to have a lot of questions.
Ooh, I think we took the time.
And I have to go quickly because I know John's going to need the extra minutes. I had to get that in. Right?
You always do.
Extra minutes.
I just want to begin my portion by saying that, you know, you can see from looking through these slides, there's just tons and tons of information that can be looked at in many different ways. And it's important to note that the teachers clamor for this information in August. They are running in, is it here, is it here, is it here? And as soon as they can access the information, they're looking at it in every way, shape, or form. First of all, for the students that they had last year, and then a few weeks go past, and they learn the new kids that they have this year, and then they look at the information again, going back to their scores to see how they did. So this is something that it's not just something that teachers look at in the fall and then put away again till the spring. It's something that they really use all along throughout the school year to help improve their program and to improve the learning for their students. So in my first slide, just the overall school overview. This is for grades 6 through 8. 85% of kids for ELA are proficient in advanced. This is the 4th year where the score has been above 80%. In math, across all grades, 65% proficient in advanced, and in science, 63% proficient in advanced. The student growth percentile in ELA, 55%, which is moderate to very high, and in math, 42%, which is moderate. You can see here listed the areas of relative strength. In 6th grade, ELA had 82% proficient advanced. 7th grade had 86% proficient advanced, and in 8th grade, 85% proficient in advanced, so excellent across the board in ELA. In math, 75% in grade 6 had proficient in advanced. This was up 8 points from the previous year, or 2014. 7th grade ELA, 58% moderate to very high growth. In 8th grade ELA, 56% moderate to very high growth. And in our population of students with disabilities, 6th grade ELA, 52%, and math, 52% proficient in advanced, and in 7th grade ELA, 62% proficient in advanced. The key points, areas of consideration at the high school, at the middle school. I say that in the morning announcements, and the kids say, you say good morning, Littleton High School. Great, yeah. The areas for consideration, certainly in math, the overall percentage for proficient and advanced has remained in the mid-60s to low 70s over the past 5 years, so that's an area that we want to grow. We need to work towards 80% proficient and advanced in all subjects at each grade level. We would like to work towards 50% moderate to very high growth in all subjects at all grade levels. And in all grades, 48% of our students with disabilities scored at the needs improvement or warning achievement level in ELA, and 73% in math, so that achieved needs improvement or warning. So that's certainly an area that draws a red flag for us. And we need to continue to improve and increase SGP of students with disabilities. So those are our main areas of concern. I'll go again, as Scott did, quickly through the slides. I need to look at him here. So you can see in the first slide for grade 6 that 33% was advanced and 53% proficient. And you can see here the growth percentiles. In the next slide, this is grade 8. You can see 34% advanced and 45% proficient, which was a bit of a dip in the dark blue, obviously, from the previous year, but still overall proficient and advanced were quite good. For grade 7 mathematics, you can see the growth percentiles in this slide. The next slide is for grade 8 in ELA, and again, the blue and dark blue, while there was a bit of a dip in the advanced, the overall blue section was excellent. the growth percentile slide. Next slide is 8th grade math. And again, a bit of a dip in both advanced and proficient, but still 27% and 37%. And those are the growth percentiles for grade 8. And this is current grade 9. You can see again the blue area, an increase in the advanced, and the overall blue area was excellent. And the growth percentile slide for the current grade 9. And in mathematics, same overall blue area, excellent. And here's the growth percentile slide for math for the current grade 9. And this is comparing the test years from 2013 to 2016 with 55% of students being proficient in the current grade 9 for science and the technology engineering test. So overall, the next steps at the middle school, data teams meet using the data analysis protocol. They review accountability results, the achievement results, SGP results, the results by subgroups. As I said, there's a lot of ways to use this material, and teachers are doing this analysis consistently through the year. It really is to identify the areas of strength and the areas that need improvement, and plan to make adjustments in the curriculum material and the instructional methods as they go on. As they determine those needs for improvement. They review best teaching practices in an effort to replicate that across all grade levels and identify plans for students who are in the needs improvement or warning or the very low growth category. So that's really the reason to be looking through the data. I have teachers who have met consistently to look through. When they do item analysis, you can look through a whole grade level and see how many students out of 100 got that particular question right or wrong, and identify what that question is so they can go back into their practice and say, we don't do enough of that. We need to ask that type of question more. We need to review this particular topic more. I need to elaborate on that more when I get to that point in my unit. So they really are down to that specific of analysis over the when they get the scores for MCAS. We need to continue with co-teaching practices in ELA and math. Currently, there are quite a few co-teaching sections where the special education teacher and or learning assistant are in the classroom with the regular classroom teacher to assist the students, and really having different methods for teaching whatever the concept is. Sometimes the review and the reinforcement is really helpful for students. We need to continue monitoring student progress using our math lab, our literacy lab, and our ASC. This year, we had a bit of a lag in time with starting students in math lab and literacy lab and in the ASC. And one of the suggestions that I'm making for next year is that we use, what happened this year is that they waited for the MCAS scores to come, and they analyzed the MCAS scores from last year. And my recommendation is that we use the scores for next year, because then we can get started on day one where kids can go into math lab, whereas this year we were waiting until we got the scores to analyze them to be able to put students in. And for me, that's difficult. Kids are already, they already have a schedule in place. They're already going to classes that they fall in love with. And then we're saying, well, you need to come out of that or come out of this to go into math lab or literacy lab or ASC. And I think, even though we'd be 1 year behind with our ASC, with our MCAS scores in making those decisions, I think it's a more humane way to create schedules for kids so they know right off the bat that's where they're going, and they get started right away instead of feeling like I'm being taken out of something I like to go into something that I need to go into. And sometimes families are hesitant to remove their student from something they like to put them into something that, in our opinion, they really need. So I think that that's a model that we'll use going forward. And also to continue the school-wide progress monitoring for the MAP assessments in the fall, winter, and spring. Again, teachers take that information and really analyze the data as we go through the year, and they can compare fall scores to winter scores to spring scores, and really get ready for the MCAS assessment in the spring. One of the things that I, throughout the year, and I have always been a proponent for, is to really just embed MCAS in everything that you do, and not by adding it on the end saying, this is our MCAS practice problem, but to design some things around that. So when you get to MCAS at the end of the year, you can very confidently say to the students, this is something you've been doing since the first day of school. It's just, that's part of how we ask questions, it's part of how we review, it's part of how we practice. This isn't something new. You've been doing it since September, and kids feel this confidence about that, oh yeah, this is something that's been on my math quiz and on the board and on everything that we have done in ELA and math and science throughout the whole year. And I have found that really beneficial way to practice. And really, one of the problems that teachers note is that students, and we've had this conversation in admin council, is that it's not a matter sometimes of the student not knowing the information, it's that they don't have a strategy for what to do when they have trouble with it. So sometimes students will leave an open response completely blank instead of putting something on the page that they could potentially get 1 point for or 2 points for. They'll leave it completely blank. And really to talk about the test taking strategies in addition to the actual information they need to know for the test, but really to have practice taking those kinds of questions so they are used to that format when the MCAS comes around in the spring. Any questions for me? I think my time was pretty good.
My
That was very
goodness.
impressive.
Very impressive.
I'll blow that in a minute.
Here comes Derek.
Alex?
Any questions?
I'm all set, thank you.
I'm starting on this side.
Oh, I didn't know.
You already did.
I heard, are there any
second.
questions? And I said,
And you
no.
didn't.
Yeah,
And that's
well,
good.
This,
Now I'm going to take all of Mike's time, all of Matt's time.
He
I'm not
didn't
yielding
yield
my
the
time. I'm
time
not
to the
yielding my
gentleman
time.
on the other side of the table.
I'm giving it to John.
I just have one question. You spoke about trying to embed the MCAS throughout the year-long curriculum so that you're not, trying to cram it in at the end, which I think makes a lot of sense. My only concern would be we want to make sure, of course, I think goes unspoken, that the curriculum is based on what we want the students to know absent the MCAS. Do you think that that the curriculum is very similar to what it would be if we didn't have to worry about MCAS? At least
I do. I guess my point in embedding is that the teachers have access to the questions. They're released at a certain time, and they can go right back to last year's test and see exact questions. So if they looked through the scores and there was a question that students did particularly poorly on, that's when they can embed now into what they're currently doing. And my idea for that is that it's just practice as they go along. It's not, here's your MCAS section of your homework. It's just a question, posed in the same kind of format. So when they go to take the test in the spring, they've seen it repeatedly, and not. I don't think we're changing what we do so kids can take the MCAS. It's just making them familiar with those types of questions. So multiple choice questions, open response questions, just having them. And talk about what do you do when you don't know how to answer that question, and talk about it as a class. So it just makes the kids more comfortable and familiar when the test comes in the spring.
Excellent, thank you.
And the test design is changing too. For years and years, when you wrote a multiple choice question, there was one answer. And now they're incorporating, so are we, but they're in the MCAS exams, they're incorporating questions that have more than one right answer. So our students really need to slow down and really read that lead closely, because they're programmed more often than not to look for that one answer. And out of 5 possibles, 3 may be right, 4 may be right. So it's kind of interesting how experience with question design and testing strategies also need to be considered when our students are writing any kind of exam.
Of course. No, thank you very much. Actually, you covered most of my questions. I liked your soundtrack on 46 here. It clarified a few of my things there, so I'll skip that. If we get back up to 39 or 43, let me see here. It's class of 2020 mathematics. Yeah, I think that one, and let me just see what 39 was. Yeah, either one. 39, I think, shows it a little bit better, if you wouldn't mind. There. So, could you maybe talk a little bit about, if you look at as the cohort goes from grade 5, 6 to 7, the advanced proficient has got a noticeable decrease across that cohort as it goes across there. Can you talk a little bit about what the cause, and maybe in back of that, and whether there's anything systemic that we need to be looking at there? You give me data, I'm going to look at it.
Yeah, I really don't feel like I can confidently answer your question.
Okay.
I feel like part of this is just the age and developmental level that the kids are at in terms of taking the test. I have in my career administered from grade 4 all the way up through grade 10. And it's very different at each grade level how kids are presented with the material. This specific current grade 8 cohort of kids, I know a little bit, but I can't really speak to the specifics on this slide.
Yeah, I can make a couple of comments. You have to remember when you're transitioning from grade 5 into grade 6, you're going from a few teachers to more teachers, and plus there's a jump in expectations. There's a jump in the rigor of the curriculum, and there are natural, what I call, transition zones in various grades. Grade 4 is one of them. Grade 6 could be another one, and at times grade 9 can. So sometimes you'll have students that are doing better in grade 5, for example, and then all of a sudden those expectations are ramped up, and that results in a temporary dip in achievement for students, and then they gradually pull up again. But again, our cohorts are only 125 kids, and we always have to remember that. Sometimes it doesn't follow the logistics of a large sample.
It may be interesting if I could just add to that, this graph depicts, I think, students who took all tests, and it's not just, they didn't necessarily take them all at LPS schools, at Russell Street and middle school. Some of those could reflect schools students who choice did. So if you looked at it more granularly, you might find that some of the students were new to LPS. And so what we see in the end result, though, at the high school is that, through the Littleton education approach, that they do quite well in the end.
If you flip up the chart 43, that one I can see does include the the previous 8th graders, so it would include the last year, right? There, which it shows a little bit of the fix. But again, my question just mainly comes back to is there's a visual trend that's evident in the thing there, and I just want to make sure we understand what's in back of it there, because it does look at recovers at a little bit at grade 8 there, but again, it is just a noticeable piece there, right?
Good.
Yep.
We don't have, Cheryl, the only thing I wanted to add, we don't have the state context this year in terms of state comparisons, but every year that I have presented, and I've talked about state level trends. In fact, DESE focused on middle level math, and so this does reinforce what Kelly was saying in terms of developmental aspects of the students and the expectations of the standards. I think the tests are more difficult tests when they enter 6th and 7th and going into 8th. There's a dip across the state. I'm not saying it's something to ignore, but it is there. I don't know if that helps.
No, again, I want to make sure, I know at the end of the day, we're where we want to be here. But again, data is data, and people look at things here, and what they see from this is continued progression of our increasing and warning and failing students. And so I want to make sure we are cognizant that that's what people will see. And do we have a crisp explanation of how are we adjusting, or is our program strong enough to overcome that? And that's what I'm just looking for the answer, so that it doesn't go left unsaid about the data that's sitting in front of us.
Oh, this is an important discussion, Darrell. I mean, and people, when they look at visuals, they look at the visual, they're not thinking about context,
Right.
and we do, most of us do that. One thing I can add to the grade 6 class, because we're a school that specializes grade by grade, so we have singletons, and in grade 6, we've had 3 math teachers in 5 years in that grade. So it's not as if we've had somebody stay in that slot consistently, and I'm not saying that that's resulted in what we see here, but it's again, it's another factor when you look at all these factors that you look at. No evidence that that's the case, but something to consider. If I know statewide there's a dip there, but if we would have had the same teacher in that classroom for 4 or 5 years, and the dip was greater than state average, for example, then we would be looking at these things very, very differently. But it's something that we monitor. I mean, we all want to see a continual trajectory of progress, and have students increase in the advanced proficiency domain throughout their schooling.
I think the accompanying SGP scores for both of those, so on both 40 and I think 44, are consistent enough where when I looked at the raw test scores, I said, yeah, there's definitely a trend there, but the SGP scores look pretty steady, which to me sort of spoke to that need.
Well, like I said, I'm not here to say that here is there's something there. I think I feel obligated to ask you about it.
Of course.
and I'm comfortable with the answer, but again, I feel that it needed to be asked. So, thank you.
Good. Mike, all set?
Yep.
Matt?
Thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone.
Grand finale.
Yep. I'll jump right to it. I want to acknowledge, as I do each year, it's already been sort of previewed or highlighted earlier, that I want to acknowledge the contributions of my colleagues at the other schools, so all the way starting with Rich, Shaker Lane, laying the foundation, and the faculty at all those schools. Of course, I want to acknowledge the outstanding performance of our students, the contributions that their parents have made to their performance at the high school, as well as our staff. We're quite pleased and honored to report tonight the excellent performance of students at the high school, with 96% proficient or advanced in grade 10 ELA, 97% proficient or advanced in mathematics, and 94% proficient or advanced in grade 9-10 science, technology, and engineering. And one of the things we always highlight at the high school each year, and this has become something we note, is the high performance of the high number of students who score in the advanced category. That certainly helps us to, as school districts get compared, that's something that sort of pops out as people look and compare suburban districts. And as you can tell, Littleton High School is staying quite competitive with surrounding towns that have high achievement. And it's a credit to the commitment of the community and the academic effort and dedication of our students. So I'll click to the next slide. SGP continues to be great at Littleton High School. I thank the faculty for their special attention to that, both in English language arts and math, where SGP is measured. It's high to moderate, or moderate to high rather, in English language arts. Lots of our students in the high category, and we're solidly there at 56. And our SGP is a 70, which is a high mark for mathematics. And I've already highlighted the percentage at the achievement levels, and you've seen that there. And the number of participants are also noted. And you can sort of see this slide, I've just mentioned this. Also, I just want, something that stands out certainly for us is the 61% who score was scored proficient or advanced in science. There is no SGP provided for science scores. It's a totally different test from the eighth grade. Again, in some, students performed exceptionally well. You can see the math SGP there. 82% of our students, that's our second best performance, really, in terms of comparing cohorts from across one year. We had 86% of our students, I think, advanced in mathematics. I think that was a smaller cohort, though, so that number sticks out to me. In math and English language arts, we do look at all the different subgroups that, to see how students are performing in individual categories. And this is something worth noting. It's a credit to the special education department. And 82% of our special education students scored proficient or higher. And in this cohort, all special education students achieved a passing, needs improvement, or better score on math, ELA, and MCAS. I just want to go back to this little table here and look at the needs improvement category for a second, not to spend a lot of attention for it because it's a very small number of students and a small sample size. But I want to actually note this as a point of pride. We're actually quite thrilled that a number of these students, because I know their individual stories and I know their families, and we celebrated with them because their students passed the test. Although they're not proficient, perhaps at this point in time in mathematics, English language arts as juniors, they passed the test, and they will not have to take the MCAS test again to graduate from high school. And this was something that, again, the students, the parents were absolutely thrilled with in getting these results, because in some cases, some parents get quite emotional about it. The students do it each year because they didn't think they were going to be able to graduate from high school because the MCAS was an impediment. It's a huge obstacle and a fear factor for some kids with significant learning disabilities. So I just wanted to highlight, though we focus a lot on advanced, I wanted to come back to this category because I know what it meant for these kids to pass this test. A lot of them throughout their elementary years scored in the warning category, and they never seen that category in one of these particular subject areas. So it's worth highlighting for that special population of students, although small. Again, the SGP is quite good for the high school. Cohort results, see a little bit of a different trend here in terms of the blues and the declining pinks and reds there. Number of less red, less pink, which it signifies that more and more students at the high school, when they get there, and we don't have the burden that the other schools have with having to test each grade level. We teach it, essentially it's one grade level, grade 10, but we do have grade 9 for science. That's where we focus our attention in science. But again, the graphic depicts excellent scores with proficiency in advanced categories. And it shows excellent growth here for English language arts, current grade 11. Achievement scores, again, you can see the dramatic shift when they get to the high school after, and this is also a maturity factor. Cheryl highlighted the developmental differences as kids go through from Russell Street to the middle school. They've grown substantially as students, and they've adopted to the rigor and the expectations of the high school. It's a little bit of a shock factor. Olivia probably can testify to when you come in September, October, the first fall. It's quite challenging, especially if you're taking honors courses.
And then you're all really stressed out about the biology MCAS exam, and Miss Temple sits you down in the auditorium, and she's like, everyone in honors biology, you will be fine. This class covers way more information than you need to know for the MCAS. So everyone takes like a deep breath, and then we move on.
Right. The instructors in that particular course, or one instructor in particular, right, is thinking about grooming the students for AP. She's more focused on what you're going to study in college and the future than on the MCAS test. And so students really rock, and particularly in the honors courses, rock that test. Okay, that's the math and math SGP. And then you can see where we are with science. It's worth highlighting the look at that leap, in the advanced category. I think we stand out. I haven't looked at the comparisons across the other high schools in the state. This is usually a point that sticks out where we have high achievement in the advanced category in comparison to other high-achieving suburban districts. Our science scores usually stick out. And we continue, we do have an ethic, as I say each year, sort of cliche, but ethic of continuous improvement. We do have a data analysis protocol that we have sort of down at this point. We look at it intensively as a department, and our department coordinators lead that effort. So I thank Mrs. Johnston and Mr. Pascucci, the English and math coordinators, for their work at the high school. And the science department, in particular, I highlight two individuals, Mrs. Berlinger and Mrs. Harrington, for their hard work and looking at the biology scores. Percentiles, especially with students who showed low or very low growth, that's something we really look at. Sometimes the students who show low growth are actually, it's because they scored so high in 8th grade, so you're not going to see a lot of growth sometimes. Their achievement stays consistent, and as it did with the cohort of students who scored, particularly in the upper scores, like 268, or 278, 280 being the highest. We have a lot of students who score in that in the 270s.
We also found that out with the NWEA as well.
Yeah.
In terms of that trend.
You can have high achievement but low growth,
right,
over time, which is, you take one or the other. Preparation for MCAS 2.0 is underway. Dr. Jamie and I will be talking throughout this year as we prepare for that in the future. Instructional adjustments are noted each year. That's something we look at. Each department has a specific list of bullet points that they go over with all the department members who are teaching MCAS related courses and make sure that they make those adjustments. We have a proactive approach, and this is a slide that's in there every year. We try to have frequent communication with parents and especially parents of academically struggling students and students who scored in the warning category. We'll reach out to parents of our current 9th grade, incoming 8th grade early on to talk about what we're going to do to help those students through the year. And we also have an educational proficiency plan process for students who score in the needs improvement category in math or English. We're required to do this for the state. We develop educational proficiency plans. The students may never reach proficiency, perhaps because of some really significant learning disability. I mean, they might not meet the 240 mark proficiency score, but we strive for proficiency with those students by providing additional assessments. And I sign off on an educational proficiency plan, so there's, before they graduate, that they were working towards proficiency even if they don't make it. A lot of our students will be deemed proficient. Those students who scored in the needs improvement category in math and English may be deemed proficient sometime in junior year or in senior year because of follow-up assessments that we provided to them. And that's scored at the local level. The state gives us that autonomy, thankfully, to do that and make that decision. Again, continued early intervention in 9th and 10th grade. And this is the slide that Dr. Jamian highlighted at the beginning with her presentation, introductory remarks. These are different. This will be sent out to the community on the district website. And there's different links to helpful information at the state level if people want to look more intensively at what the MCAS is all about or what SGP means specifically. And thank you for your time. I'm happy to answer any questions.
What's to say? That's excellent.
Yeah, thank you.
I got a quick question. Is this normal statewide to sort of have the development, like you watch the warning and failing categories decline slowly, really right until you hit the grade 10 test? Is that sort of the way it happens?
A consistent, you'll see a lot more advanced and proficient students in ELA.
And is that because the test and the students are coming together in that gap, or is it something that we're doing here?
It could be the test in some cases. The test maybe is not as, some people question whether the test is less challenging. It's not a college, as Dr. Jamie pointed out,
Right,
some other people from other states have a test that's given in junior or senior year, and it's really a test to measure preparation for college. And this is a basic competency test to make sure that students have skills to move forward. And basically, you can attest to a high school diploma, but it does not show. Students might score very well, outstanding on an MCAS test in high school, but not do very well in college. Not necessarily, but it's possible. Because of all that work that happens after 10th grade. And it's purposely put in 10th grade, as you know, because it gives lots of time for remediation. Right. But I think you're right. If you were to match it up with, we try not to compare ourselves with the state too much. Because
no, I understand that, but I guess it's less of a question for the high school, but for the elementary and middle schools. Is that the normal progression that you would see warning or failing scores that then when you get to the high school
more
level?
Often than not.
Yeah, I think you're onto something there.
Yeah. Yeah, that is, yeah.
Yeah, there's lot less failures, a lot less needs improvement at the grade 10 level.
Cognitively prepared
Schools I've worked in that follow the same trend, almost always, it goes up from 8th to 10th.
Okay.
And remember, our students write SATs after that as well. When we look at those.
And remember, this test counts for graduation. The stakes up. This is a high stakes test. So the stakes attached are very important to keep in mind. This really matters to students, so that, I don't think it's a high motivator throughout the year for kids, but certainly is an external motivator near the test, where they start to feel it. Olivia actually mentioned that, and then students sometimes need to be reassured as they get ready for the test because they're feeling a bit stressed about the possibility they might not pass it or something.
Dr. Harrington is right on for that one, because 10th grade English, all the 10th grade classes, you feel the workload, it's a bit more than freshman year, and so you're you find your balance again, and then smooth sailing, and then you come up to MCAS. And it's earlier, you forget how early it is when you don't do it really freshman year. You're oh God, it's the MCAS. I know I've done it before. I know I'll be fine. But if I don't pass, I can't graduate. And then I'll be that one kid that didn't graduate. And it's it's the thought process, and it's not the right thought process. And this is all of the honors kids. This is almost every kid in my grade. And it's not the right thought process, but it's oh God, this is the last big thing besides keeping up my grades that really affects whether I get to graduate or not.
It's okay to have a few butterflies,
Well,
but you
and
don't
so
want it to be all.
that was sort of the thrust of my question is there something we can isolate? Is it that the test gets easier? Is it that maybe we do test prep more, test taking skills more because it's the high stakes test? Is it that student, is it the actual subject? The learning in those subjects seems to it jives with where they are in the developmental process. I was curious.
Two-year process, though, I think is important, too, because when they come to the high school, there's basically a bi-year in 9th grade for English and math. There's no MCAS in 9th grade. So we have 2 years to work with
some
them.
MCAS stuff, though.
We embed MCAS right from the beginning in September of 9th grade. It's embedded into the curriculum. I know Cheryl spoke to that. That's something we do. We don't do a test prep model in the spring of sophomore year. We started right from the get-go, and it's just embedded into the kids don't even realize it's just sort of in the flow of how they in the curricular units, similar style questions. But that's a 2-year process.
There is a trend that isn't common, and if you look at our students on IEPs and look at how well they do on MCAS, and you also have to take into account we've restructured our high school in the past 3-4 years. And we've had the critical mass to add programs to that school. And even taking that into account with the addition of programs where 4 years ago we would have had to send those students to other programs outside the district. You look at how well our students are performing that have IEPs. To me, that's incredible when I look at that statistic. That really stands out to me as unique.
Actually, it's more of a comment since you actually hit it there, that MCAS is an important test, but it's not the ultimate achievement of their high school education. And I think that's a critical piece for us to remember. Yes, we have to meet that milestone that the state puts in front of us, but that's not the bar that we're setting or looking for here. So,
thank you.
Thank you.
Olivia will recall from this morning, I listed off the names of the John Abigail Adams Scholarship recipients. Because it's based on MCAS results, and we have a lot of seniors. There maybe 25 to 30 names, I think, at least I listed. And it's based on this. That's a motivator for some families who would already know early on in sophomore year. I had a young woman come down who's in our senior class she really needed to know if she had got that scholarship. It was really important to her. And she had that in mind when she took the test for some reason. Not every kid's like that, but it was important to her. She knew she was going to a Massachusetts State College or University, even as a sophomore. And so, she was on the list, and she was absolutely thrilled when she found out, because that covers tuition, although the fees are higher. But it does help. So I just wanted to
Everything-
make a mention of that.
everything helps.
Make a mention of that today.
$8,000 a year over
As-
4 years is a lot of money.
It's a lot of money, so for some families, the MCAS has some financial incentive too.
Returning your bottles to Donalds, it all helps.
I have a question and a comment, also really comment, just that 82% of SPED students advanced or proficient is incredible. And that all of them achieve passing is amazing. And I think there's a lot to applaud here, at looking at all the numbers really, but that is something that stuck out to me because those are the kids that I worry about when I think about the high school MCAS. I don't,
Right.
as Daryl said, it's just one metric. I don't really read a lot into it, but for those kids where that really is a huge barrier to them, I think that's magnificent. And
Great.
I'm just very proud of that. My one question was, for the probably a handful of students, and you tenure at the high school over a number of years, the handful who weren't able to pass, who got the failing, whether they're special ed or not, have we generally been able to get them the competency determination by the end of their high school career?
Yes, we have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yep.
Every single
We
time.
had one student stands out in particular, came back after he had graduated, or had got a certificate of basically attendance or completion, but had not received a high school diploma. He came back and he continued to work with us and take the test. This was some years ago, and we celebrated with him when he ultimately passed that test. He was he was, I don't know, he was 21 years old or something. Came back and took that test and passed it. And he was an ELL learner, which was interesting, for us, because he had that other additional barrier and worked intensively. So it wasn't, he was particularly struggling with the language, and that was understandable.
Yeah.
So, but he did pass and earn a high school diploma. Okay. Good, thanks.
Thank you. Thank you all. I mean, the MCAS is important to the state, and it's something we talk about every year. I think we had a good discussion tonight that helped us understand the balance that we expect to see as school committee members, and we're confident that it's being achieved. And again, focusing on the process of, not specifically MCAS, but just the overall process of preparing the kids to be lifelong learners. The MCAS will more or less take care of itself in the vast majority of the cases. And the ones where it might not, I think Alex's point was terrific. We clearly we have our infrastructure in place to take care of business and meet that ultimate outcome in 10th grade. So I think we're doing a terrific job of that. And I think as long as we continue to focus on the process, and the interim outcomes that we focus on aren't necessarily the MCAS interim outcomes, but the other ones that we have in place that we take real good advantage of, that's clearly demonstrated in what happens when, as you said, do the kids just happen to come together with the test, on that 10th grade test? Well, it doesn't necessarily just happen to, but all that work that was put in that maybe isn't directly related to MCAS, but nonetheless reflects out quite vividly as we get there. I think that's great. So thank you all. I know it's a big presentation, and appreciate it.
All right.
Presentation, do we have any, it says other, but I don't think we have any other.
No, that, we thought we had another presentation this evening, but we weren't sure at that time, so that's why we put other on. We don't.
All right, so we're looking at the FY18 proposed capital requests.
Yes, so you have a handout, and it was emailed this afternoon. This is a revised list, and basically the revision is the projects are the same, but I've taken Daryl Baker's interaction with the PMBC, and the PMBC and Daryl are working on splitting out the facility-related projects versus some of those that are more geared toward the education side, and so this list reflects that breakout between what we think is going to be on a PMBC list and what the school list is, and the PMBC list is spread out over a 3-year projected forecast at this point in time. So that's basically what this new revision is. So we're still looking for $372,000 in capital for school projects per this list. It's up to discussion of the school committee. We can go through the line items one by one. I can answer any questions, your discussion.
Yeah, I just want to clarify one thing. at the next PMBC meeting, I requested that we put the preliminary discussion on the facilities planning budget on. This is the proposal I'm going to bring to them relative to the school committee. So I don't have buy-in from the PMBC at this point. I'm just trying to structure our proposal to them so that our, what you call sort of our pure facility items versus our educational items are separated, and then with PMBC, and then if necessary with the selectmen, we can have a debate or discussion about where those costs should slide to.
Okay, if you would like me at the PMBC meeting to help talk through some of these projects, just let me know.
Yeah, I think I've got enough backup for that at this point, you know, not to have you sit through another 3-hour meeting.
Well.
There.
So we did submit the original list to the town. The original list that we submitted was the $633,250. Obviously, that number is decreased or may decrease a little bit if the PMBC takes on some of these projects. And if the PMBC does or does not include some of these projects, we may come back and revisit this list again. But this is the current form of where we're at. And I'd like to give this copy over to the town so they can just stay aware of where we're at with our capital requests, because they're starting to put numbers together as well.
So I've got a quick question. The Chromebook replacements.
Yep.
How does that interact with like the policy going forward about the bring your own device stuff? And what's the distinction between the Chromebooks and how they're different utilized? You know, is it, I was under the impression that maybe the renewal of those was phasing out at some point.
No, I can actually answer. That's a good question. We'll have a discussion at our next meeting in regard to the one-on-one Chromebook program at the high school. And the presentation is going to include what do we need to do to start integrating a one-on-one program at grade 9, and then following it through. And we're going to have to talk about an alternate fee structure to do that. But it won't replace the cost of all Chromebooks. Hopefully, throughout time, more and more people will buy a device for their children as they go through school. So we didn't want to obviously mandate that, you know, like the scientific calculator approach. When you hit grade 8, you need a scientific calculator. But you have to remember with Chromebooks, there's a 4-year, for lack of a better word, life expectancy. And what happens after 4 years is that it's not supported anymore.
Right.
So it's consumable. And when we went into Chromebooks, it was about 4 years ago, and you know we bought quite a few Chromebooks for the district. And in the next couple of years, we're going to see a real, some of it a challenge that we've worked out with a long-range plan. We're going to be okay, but we didn't cycle the buying of Chromebooks because it was new. They were cost-effective. We were trying to increase our technology, and we really felt that you know there wasn't enough known 4 years ago about what was this mystery date after 4 years, what actually happened. Well, now we know, and we can't use them.
Right.
Yeah.
So are these leases or are they purchases?
No, they're purchases, and really at the end of the 4 years, they're really not worth anything. They're usable. And
I mean, you have to remember
usable
the value
goods,
of
I
a
guess.
The value of a Chromebook purchase is about $260 to $270 a unit.
So actually, that ties into the other theme that, you know, as you saw it in the PMBC list and trying to make it look projected out a couple of years, including those anticipated life cycling of our Chromebooks or other pieces there in our capital outlook will be helpful for us to provide to the town.
Right.
A little bit better insight in terms of our capital needs, future capital
Yeah.
needs, even though they may change, obviously, as the
we
technology
got that
does.
information.
Yeah, we have a 4 or 5 year projection of technology costs as we go along. We've been working on that for a few months now, and it does taper off a bit because we're trying to obviously increase the one-on-one program and have people bring devices to school. At the same time, we've kind of managed to have a plan where we're not going to get in a corner because of, you know, as a result of having 80% of our Chromebooks reach their life expectancy in 1 year. So we've taken care of that. Now that we know the game, we figured out how to play it, but we didn't know that.
So it's just that the software support is no longer supported.
Yeah, and they just don't. they don't interact with the web browser.
Right.
There's
And so we as
more
a,
physical wear and tear as well.
well, it's also we as a district can't monitor what's going on those machines because they won't interface.
Plus, it's all fragmented, and I'm just finding this out now with somebody, with a few people that I know that have finished the life expectancy, and really within a month, they're just kind of tossing them because they're not good for it. So-
And is that just for school purposes? Like, do they have a value outside of the district, or is it really not?
No, because if you can't access the web browser component, that's how it works, appropriately, then they're really not trustworthy to use at that point in time. Like your programs don't work properly.
If you don't mind, I jump in.
Sure.
I got a couple of things. I mean, my new iPad, because my old one, every time Apple updated it, it became an order of magnitude slower.
Right.
You have that part of it there, and then, you know, and if you look at your Android phone and stuff, the updates usually stop like the day after you bought it. So you're stuck with old technology that, you know, as everything else moves along, they're just end of lifed there on it. But I think, you know, we got to get comfortable with the price point that we're talking about, $250 versus, I think when we're buying our PCs, we're talking $1,500 a piece or
$1,100 to $1,200.
something there where, you know, I think we have a different life cycle expectation, or can accept a different life cycle expectation.
All right. You guys good with the capital list? I appreciate the effort you put forth in pulling out. I think that's a very good strategy, not just for us, but just for how the town thinks about capital.
Yeah. So before you give it to the town, put the word proposed on the PMBC side, because I have not coordinated that with them.
Yep.
We're not giving this to the town, are we?
Well, I want to give it to the town so that as PMBC and FinCom and the selectmen are looking at capital
Do you want
needs.
to hold off until you?
We're meeting on I asked that this be an agenda topic at our next meeting, which I think is the 21st there. And then if I caught the timing right, the budget summit meeting is January 6th or 7th, that first Saturday. So, and there's no meetings in between there. So I don't know if they're planning on, I assume everybody's going to start talking capital needs at that budget meeting. So I wanted to try to get the framework in place.
Can you hold off, or do you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Why don't we do that? Why don't we see if we can get past Daryl's next PMBC meeting, and maybe instead of waiting to come back here, you can just get with Steve.
Yeah.
And
If they are on board with at least not saying that's ridiculous, we're not going to go forward with it, I'll shoot you a note back.
Okay.
On it.
All right.
There, just so that we don't get out of step with the other committee.
Okay. And I'll just update Bonnie that it's a work in progress.
Tell her that the numbers are right.
Yes.
Right-ish.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
as a first pass at it, but then we're just thinking about how which bucket we're gonna put them in.
Yep.
And I think she should be fine with that.
Okay, that's
As long as
fine. I'm
for her
just trying to
planning
keep them in the
purposes, I
loop, that's all.
yeah. If the overall number is what it is, then she can work with that, and then determining which buckets it falls in. That might even not even get determined until they have that budget summit thing. And nobody's entire capital list is gonna get met, ours or anybody else's, so.
So I guess I would be more comfortable just putting draft on it and telling her that this hasn't been coordinated and give her this version rather than the other version, because I don't know how they'll be creating a list based on inputs that we give them. We've seen them create their own spreadsheets.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I don't think we should give them anything more than we've already given them until you meet with.
Well, I think even talking about the 633
Oh, yeah,
number,
I think
that's
that-
I think that I'm a little concerned about that, because then we have to get it moved rather than getting it on the right list at the beginning.
Let's just make sure we think about communicating the draft concept to her.
Right.
Do we give her anything yet about?
We gave her the initial list of the 633 because they needed something by the 21st.
I would just recommend we replace that.
Yeah, okay, so do that. Replace that with this and put draft on that.
Yeah,
And then we'll
just so that we can get the process already moving rather than waiting until the middle of January.
Yep, and I'll make sure they understand it's a work in progress. Yep, thank you very much.
Okay.
Before we dive much deeper into like the exact listing on that, because I have tests early in the morning. So I knew that budget was kind of a thing that was happening tonight. I know, like, from seeing this, we're not going deep, and I don't particularly need to know exactly where all of the school's money is going. But I did talk to some of the students at the high school, and I thought it might be interesting if I shared some of the things that were priorities to them in terms of where money goes to. And I'm going to switch over to first person singular because that's how I wrote my notes for this. So we as the student body completely understand that the budget is complex and there's so many more layers and pieces of it that we don't know about, and B, I'm not sure we really want to know about. But the students that I talked to are primarily 10th and 11th graders involved in a number of extracurricular activities, and it's like 5 things that they really highlighted. And one was money for repairs and updates, such as the leaking roof and replacing some desks that are older and have shown their use. Having funds to update technology regularly. Overall, we all appreciate the Chromebooks, but some now are missing keys and the touchpad isn't as reliable as it used to be. Some more water fountains, like just generally around the school with like the water bottle filling things, because not all of us have time in the 3-minute break to run down to the gym and stay hydrated during the day. Continued support of an expansion of extracurricular activities. One person has a specific call for a new volleyball team at the high school. Continued support of high quality teachers. Many felt that specific teachers made all the difference for them, and continuing to maintain and recruit amazing staff is important. So on behalf of all of the LHS students, I want to say thank you for like even just listening. I know I'm just one person and there's only so many students I can reach out to, but a lot of people, when they know what's on the meetings, will come up to me and be like, hey, can you like low-key just like mention this like somewhere in the meeting?
If you think it would be worthwhile, we're happy to come down and meet with interested students to talk about the overall budget and to get more input on what they're asking for, and to maybe address, you know, we're doing that to this extent and we're not sure we're going to be able to do it to more of an extent because of these constraints. But more than happy to do that if people, you kind of disappointed me when you said you didn't think you wanted to know more about the budget, because I would love to talk about it.
I mean, there's like certain level that like I'll go to, but
I can make it, you know, age appropriate.
I was hoping you were going to say fun.
I cannot make it fun. I can't do that.
I'm pretty sure you can find a way. I went to a conference and they taught us how the internet worked by throwing stuffed animals at each other.
I can be humorous about it, you know, that's fun. My kids don't think it's that funny, but maybe somebody else will.
It's not as hard to grasp as it seems.
Okay.
Like
this
when we
looks a
discussed
lot
it
more
before-
complicated than it probably is.
Yeah, once you get the context
Yeah.
for it, you're like, got it.
So I don't want to address everything on your list, but we are working on some of these things. We're putting another water bottle fill station in. We're trying to address the technology.
Right, that's why I'd love to go
capital project.
down
So
there.
I'd let you know.
Right. I'd love to go down there.
I'll let you know if that's something that
Because I don't want to
like
make you
enough
the middleman the
students
whole
would
time,
add.
like we can.
Most of the time it's not, but I'll see if that's something like enough people would actually be interested in to have like an after-school thing.
We do have that student advisory committee ready too, so that'd be great.
Be happy to do it.
Yeah, me as well.
Thank
and I'm
you
sure
for
the
that.
superintendent as well.
That'd be great.
That's good.
That was a good list, thank you.
All right.
And on that note, I'm gonna go
Have a
home and
nice
go to
night.
sleep.
So any other questions on the capital? We're good?
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
All right, the FY17 budget increase.
Yes, so there's a motion in your packet. Again, this is more of a housekeeping. These are additional funds that was received by the town through Chapter 70 and other local funds. This is the Chapter 70 portion that's was approved at town meeting to increase the school appropriation budget by the $52,362. So it's already, I guess it's more formal for the school committee to vote a higher appropriated budget, and that's why the motion's before you.
Yeah, I think we should do that because it'll make it, help us refer back when we jump off at a different number that we voted to start this year's budget
Right, so
process.
the current approved budget, appropriated budget was 18 million as authorized by the town and school committee. This would be an additional 52,362 for a total appropriated budget for FY17 of $18,052,362. And suggested motion, wording for the motion is there as well.
Any questions before we entertain the motion or discussion? Okay.
I'll make a motion to approve the increase in the appropriated budget from $18 million to $18,052,362 as approved at the November 16th town meeting.
I'll second.
Motion made and seconded. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, we have a item here, alumni field renovation. So just a couple of things that, once the alumni field project got approved at town meeting, there were some questions about what it's going to mean or how it's going to impact some of the things that we've traditionally done down there that we might not be able to do because of the build. The first one was we've had the girls lacrosse program playing down there. So the idea right now is, and this is still all to be determined, but the ideal outcome would be to start construction in the spring, do it through the summer, and bring that facility back online for the beginning of the, if not the beginning of the fall sports practice season, the fall sports playing season. So September 1-ish. The practice season starts kind of in mid-August, but if we can't get that, we would love to be on the first week or so of September, or maybe the second week, when they start playing games, have it online. That still has to be determined. I think we'll have some comment about that in a minute. But if we do take that facility offline this spring to try to meet that timeline, it would affect most directly the girls lacrosse program, high school lacrosse program, which is practiced and played down there for the last 2 springs. Mike Lynn, as the AD, met with the Park and Rec Director, Park and Rec Commission, and there were some youth sports leagues that were part of that. And they made a determination that the girls lacrosse program this coming spring will use Corper Field, which is the field going out on King Street towards Air, which most of us would call the soccer field. It's the field that's dedicated to youth soccer. So the girls lacrosse program will practice and play their home games there. The boys lacrosse program will play one more spring up at the high school the way they have been doing. There's no change there. And youth lacrosse will continue to use that field. There'll be no change there. The other thing that people were asking about was graduation, because if we do go with that construction timeline or something similar to it, that facility would not be available for graduation. So I met with Kelly and John Harrington, and we talked about some options. One would be to just go indoors at the high school. It's not really a favored solution, although it might happen anyway, because if it rains, it rains. But it's difficult to fit everybody in there, all the family members that want to attend. It really doesn't work. You know, we have to do tickets and limit and do overflow in the cafeteria, the gym, et cetera, et cetera. So we tried to avoid that one. One thought was to do it outside at the high school and bring many more folding chairs so the audience would sit in folding chairs. There were a couple things we didn't like about that. One is if you do all that preparation and it rains, you did it for nothing. The problem is too, is if you don't raise the stage, everybody's looking kind of flatline, and instead of looking down, taking pictures, everything else. So we weren't really in favor of that. And then we started floating the idea of using facilities outside of Littleton. And one we struck on quite quickly was Neshoba Tech, Neshoba Valley Technical High School. They do their graduation on a Saturday. We could conceivably we could piggyback with them and do the Friday. We take Friday, they take Saturday. They're already set up. There wouldn't be a lot of changes that had to happen for us to have it on Friday and them to have it on Saturday. We reached out to the principal and superintendent there, and Charlie Ellis, who's our rep to the Neshoba Valley, also reached out, and they came back like in a heartbeat saying, yes, we can make that work for you. You know, that might be a great solution. And actually, they like it because we would split the bill, and they would get a year of graduation for half price, and we're going to get a year of graduation for effectively half price. So we're going to pursue that one and make sure that we can make it work. It sounds on the face of it that it's definitely feasible. We just got to, you know, cross the T's and dot the I's and see how it goes. We have proximity. Nobody has to get on a highway to get there if they don't want to. They were very enthusiastic about helping us out. It would allow for the sight lines to be traditional, what we expect. So I think that would be a pretty good
They
solution.
graduate on their field, or they do it indoors?
They do it on their field.
They
You
have a
know,
turf-
weather
they
permitting.
have a
Yeah,
turf
no, I
field.
know, they
Yeah.
have a nice facility.
Yeah, exactly. So weather permitting, then we would do it outside at Neshoba Valley Tech. If the weather didn't cooperate, we would come back to our high school.
Yep.
And the only thing that we talked about was we probably have to be a little more conservative about what the timeline is from making the call. Usually we can go up to, I wouldn't say the 11th hour, but we go,
Well, we actually have a backup plan. I did talk to Denise Pigeon, who's now the superintendent, and she was very gracious, as you pointed out, right away responsive to our, understanding our dilemma and happy to help us. So I'm very appreciative to her and to Schcmte Tech. One of the things that we can do is we can have it scheduled a regular Friday night time slot. We'll probably move it up a half hour because we have a larger class this year. It would remain set up, if the weather cooperates, everything will remain set up for Schcmte Tech to use the following morning. I believe their graduation is the next morning on Saturday. We would have potential, what Denise was willing to work out is say, you know, if it rains Friday night, but it's fine Saturday, because we'll have our graduation on Saturday, you can take the Saturday afternoon
Even
slot.
better.
So that's going to be our backup plan.
Okay.
Our ultimate contingency, if the weekends are washed out, Friday to Sunday, you know, into Sunday morning, we would have graduation Saturday night indoors, if necessary.
Okay.
I'd like to have that little leeway, because there's such a strong preference by everybody in the community to have the graduation outside. Because our auditorium, as nice as it is very limited, and this is a larger class. When we last had a graduation inside, the class size was 93 students. And you know, we had a six ticket limit for families. And that was an imposition that they felt. This was a much larger class, over 120 students, and they would certainly, we'd be hard pressed to not give them more than 4 tickets.
Right.
So that's not going to go over well with the spillover into the cafeteria with a big screen and everything. So I'd like to have that contingency for Saturday at Schcmte Tech, and Denise was fine with it.
okay. So keep working the process, but I think the point is that at this early stage in the game, I think we have some viable, a pretty viable
We do.
alternative.
They've approved it
Yeah,
on
so,
their end, so.
so that's good.
And as long as we're fine with it, we can do it there.
So that's all I had specifically about alumni. PNBC met.
Yeah, so
Last night.
I'm going to just finish covering PMBC during the meeting here rather than during the other piece there. So the one piece that I want to, you know, so we met with the architect and he gave us a draft, you know, schedule to look at what he needs to do to get a construction package out and the timing for all the permitting and everything there. And one of the things that pops up in the preliminary planning is the construction period starting on May 1st with the goal of finishing it by September 1st there. I obviously have concerns here of when do we release Alumni Field for construction purposes here. I expressed concern last night that without a solid safety plan, I can't see exactly at this point in time approving a May 1st release of the thing. That first part is all of the heavy construction to start pulling down the bleachers, pulling out all the topsoil, and prepping the field there. So I think we need to have a discussion about, you know, what would be the safety plan, what and when could we release
Was Gail in the room when that was brought up?
Yes.
What was their response to that?
I think he expressed concern that the further it slips, that September 1st date is in jeopardy.
But did it catch them by surprise that did the school would expect to have a safety plan in place? I mean,
I didn't bring up specifically a safety plan.
Okay.
I said I was concerned about, you know, all of the construction traffic, given that that's right in the middle of our two schools there. There was a debate and discussion that I'd rather not go into here, but I want to bring it here, you know, in terms of I need to start sounding out, you know, the committee and the administration's position on when do we feel we could, and under what terms can we allow construction to start on that property.
Yeah, I mean,
part of
the reason that I asked that question was, these guys have done these types of projects over and over and over again, and the typical build period is spring and summer to come online for the fall, so that nobody misses the season. Sometimes they'll even get the spring season in. So I would be shocked if they didn't have, you know, mitigation strategies and safety plans that they would expect to execute or at least look at, and if they say, look, we don't think we can do it, or we don't think, we're not assured that they can do it, then that'll be discussion. But I would very much like to see that discussion and analysis done before we really make any determinations, one way or the other.
My concern, and I said it as a layman there, but representing school safety is my primary concern here, is a lot of those projects are done at other people's high schools, for example, and usually set off from the school, piece there. Our facility is right in the middle of our two lower grade schools.
But some of the ones that they've done are in inner or more urban campuses. So
the urban, I mean, if they do a project in an urban campus in the city center, they obviously have safety plans developed, and they're going to erect structures that are going to prevent any access to that area. I mean, one thing we need to think about is the traffic flow.
Traffic flow and
they'll
parking.
have ideas, and we need to review them, but I would put the onus on them to first of all
we
come
should
up
tell
with a
them, right,
safety
we expect a
plan.
full-blown,
Yeah, and
and even
there's a lot of
having it,
foot
we still
traffic
might
too
not be
because of
okay
schools.
with it.
Right.
We might, but we're gonna have to see it before we can make our
Well,
determination.
I guess I'm gonna make it clear to them that the school committee via our administration needs to see that plan and have approval of that
Yes.
plan. It's not PMBC's approval, it's not
Yeah, for
AFRAC's
sure.
approval,
For
it's
sure.
not
For sure.
Gail's approval there. I just want to make sure that that's the position I feel I'm going to have. I want to make sure I have the support of this committee,
Anybody else?
and that's what our position is there on it. The facility doesn't get released until our superintendent is confident of the safety plan in place there.
Totally agree.
Okay. I just want to make sure that,
Anybody else?
I'm not speaking as an individual, I'm speaking, on
for
behalf
sure.
of the board.
We're on board.
Good. All right. Any other PMBC related?
No, I covered them all as we were going through here, so.
All right, we'll keep going. There are no interested citizens, so we kid. But, we'll just keep going with the subcommittee reports, and I'll circle back to interested citizens before we finish. Budget subcommittee, we have had a couple meetings. Really, the next step for us is, normally, we would have already had the budget summit. We haven't had it, so we're going to try to get our two FinCom reps in front of the budget subcommittee, maybe next week, not next week, the week after. Working on that, and then to prepare for that budget summit, and we'll be ready to go on that. We have, we've definitely got work done on what we expect to be able to present, but we want to give it to them first and talk to them about it. All we have is information so far on what we're projecting for an ask. We have no information on what the town's looking at, or, expectations on growth, et cetera, et cetera. So, moving right along on that. So that's fine.
And like I said, I missed my note that MASC had a presentation on budget presentation practices.
yeah.
And I meant to send that to you. I'll
Yes,
try to
thank you.
get that out to you.
Yeah.
So it had a lot of nice suggestions.
Yeah, definitely,
They
yeah.
didn't say adopt them all, but they said,
Right.
here's some suggestions.
Perfect, yeah, definitely do that. And then we can look at it and talk about it at a budget subcommittee.
Yep.
As we get, because now we'll start, I wouldn't say now, but after the new year, we're definitely going to start thinking about the presentation.
And they gave tips on how to, in terms of interacting with the other boards and also in terms of how it helps.
All right, great, yeah, definitely send that along. All right. Policy subcommittee?
Yes, so we have 53 policies that are up for review this year. I have done a preliminary review with all the B section, which is school committee governance and administration governance, of those 30 policies. So I have sent those to Kelly to review my review. The vast majority of them are already identical to MASC policy and don't require an update. A handful of them require a couple of grammatical or very minor non-substantive changes, and then maybe 3 or 4. I'll sit down with Kelly and talk through a little bit more, just because a couple of things caught my eye. And then once we get situated there, we'll bring them back to the committee. And so that's 30 out of the 53. And there was some heavy lifting. It was a little bit of a sticker shock there, but
Laughing.
But yeah,
It would have been 80 if
I know.
compared
I
to
know.
town
I was looking at those. I was
Every
looking at
time you
those.
give a policy update, you should turn to the bureau and say thank you.
Oh, yes, thank you. I mean, going through and having all the documentation and the review history and the reference material right in front of me was a lot easier. So folders within folders within folders of data, which took a little bit of learning to navigate, but now that I've got it, so I appreciate that. Definitely made it easier. And now that you're fixing up work with the PNBC, I think whoever follows you there will be similarly
You'd be happy to
grateful.
go back to PNBC after the field's built.
I think Mike wants to go back to PNBC. But that's where we are now. Gave Kelly some vacation reading.
Great. All right, interested citizens? Seeing none. All right. Our next meeting, we do have one more meeting before the holidays. It's on December 22nd. We're talking about some ideas about bringing in like a fake fireplace and festive sweaters. I'll let you know if anything comes of that. We don't need an executive session, but I just do want to remind the committee that we are entering negotiations. We actually have one very preliminary meeting set up, or trying to set up with the LEA to talk about process and timeline. But after the new year, we will enter into negotiation, and there will be a need for some executive sessions to strategize about how we approach the contract.
We probably want to invite the Board of Selectmen and Finance Committee to an executive session
Yes,
to kick off negotiations.
I think they actually have asked for that, and we haven't acted on it yet. So,
But I was saying invite them to one of our executive sessions.
yes. That would be terrific.
It's a good idea.
Yeah. And if we're going to do that, we'll do it.
We can do it at the beginning of the meeting,
Yeah, we'll
but
do it
I'm
prior.
just-
Yeah, maybe do a 6:30 start and do that.
They did confirm the organizational meeting next
Next
Thursday.
Thursday. Okay, right, good, okay. All right, good. So that's just kind of coming up in the new year. We talked about getting past town meeting, we did. We can get more focus on the budget and negotiations coming up along the road. Normal business that we transact. Okay? All right, anything else?
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
Motion made and seconded, all those in favor? Aye. Thank you.